Chinkie's Flat by Louis Becke. Chapter 1. Chinkie's Flat. Chinkie's Flat, in its decadence, was generally spoken of, by the passing traveler, as a God-forsaken hole. And it certainly did present a repellent appearance when seen for the first time, gasping under the torrid rays of a North Queensland sun, which had dried up every green thing except the silver-leaved ironbarks, and the long, sinuous line of sheoaks which denoted the course of Connolly's Creek on which it stood. The township was one of the usual Queensland mining type, a dozen or so of bark-roofed humpies, a public house with the title of the Digger's Best, a blacksmith's forge, and a quartz-crushing battery. The battery at Chinkie's Flat stood apart from the township, on a little rise overlooking the yellow sands of Connolly's Creek, from whence it derived its water supply, when there happened to be any water in that part of the creek. The building which covered the antiquated 5-stamper battery, boiler, engine, and tanks, was merely a huge roof of bark supported on untrimmed posts of brigalow and swamp gum, but rude as was the structure, the miners at Chinkie's Flat, and other camps in the vicinity, had once been distinctly proud of their battery, which possessed the high-sounding title of the Ever Victorious, and had achieved fame by having in the good times of the flat yielded a certain Peter Finnerty 2,000 ounces of gold from 100 tons of alluvial. The then owner of the battery was an intelligent, but bibulous ex-marine engineer, who had served with Gordon in China, and when he erected the structure he formally christened it the Ever Victorious, in memory of Gordon's army, which stamped out the Taiping Rebellion. The first crushing put through was Finnerty's, and when the clean-up was over, and the hundreds of silvery balls of amalgam placed in the retorts turned out over 166 pounds weight of bright yellow gold, Chinkie's Flat went wild with excitement and spirituous refreshment. In less than 3 months there were over 500 diggers on the field, and the Ever Victorious banged and pounded away night and day, the rattle and clang of the stamps only ceasing at midnight on Saturday, and remaining silent till midnight on Sunday, the Sabbath being devoted to cleaning up, retorting the amalgam, and overhauling and repairing the machinery, and for relaxation, organizing riding parties of 20 or 30, and chasing Chinamen, of whom there were over 300, within a radius of 20 miles. The rich alluvial of Chinkie's Flat had, as a matter of fact, been first discovered by a number of Chinese diggers, who were each getting from 5 to 10 ounces of gold per day, when they were discovered by the aforesaid Peter Finnerty, who was out prospecting with a couple of mates. Their indignation that a lot of heathen chows should be scooping up gold so easily, while they, Christians and legitimate miners, should be toiling over the barren ridges day after day without striking anything, was so great that for the moment, as they sat on their horses and viewed the swarming Chinese working their cradles on the bank of the creek, the power of speech deserted them. Hastily turning their tired horses' heads, they rode as hard as they could to the nearest mining camp, and on the following day 30 hairy-faced foreign devils came charging into the Chinese camp, uttering fearful threats, and shooting right and left, with blank cartridges. The Chinese broke and fled, and in half an hour each of the 30 men had pegged out a claim, and Chinkie's Flat became famous as one of the richest, though smallest, alluvial diggings in the far north. 3 months after the discovery of the field by Mr. Peter Finnerty, Old Taiping, as Gordon's ex-marine engineer had been promptly nicknamed, arrived with his crushing battery, and then indeed were halcyon days for the Flat. From early morn till long past midnight the little bar of the Digger's Best was crowded with diggers, pack horsemen and teamsters. A police trooper arrived and fixed his tent on the ridge overlooking the creek, and then, the very zenith of prosperity, a bank official followed, and a stately building, composed of a dozen sheets of bark for a roof, and floor sacks for the sides, was erected and opened for business on the same day, amid much rejoicing and a large amount of liquid refreshment, dispensed by the landlord of the hotel, at a shilling per nobbler. For 6 months longer all went well. More alluvial patches were discovered in the surrounding country, and then several rich reefs were found a mile away from the Flat, and every day new men arrived from Cooktown to the north, and Brisbane, Sydney, and far New Zealand to the south. 3 new hotels sprang up. The police force was increased by another trooper and 2 black trackers, who rode superciliously around the camp, carbines on thighs, in their dark blue uniforms with scarlet facings, and condescended to drink with even the humblest white man, and then came the added glory of the Chinkie's flat gold escort. When a police van with an Irish sergeant, 2 white troopers, and 8 black police rattled through the camp, and pulled up at the bank, which now had a corrugated iron roof, a proper door, and 2 windows, and the manager's own private property, a tin shower bath suspended by a cord under the veranda, a seltzogene, and a hen with 7 chickens. The manager himself was a young sporting gentleman of parts, and his efforts to provide Sunday recreation for his clients were duly appreciated. He was secretary of the Chinkie's Flat Racing Club, meeting every alternate Sunday, and he and old Tai Ping, between them, owned a dozen of kangaroo dogs, which lived on the community generally, and afforded much exciting sport every Saturday, either in hunting kangaroos or Chinamen, both of which were plentiful in the vicinity. For although Peter Finnerty and his party had succeeded in driving away the heathen from the flat itself, the continued further discoveries of rich alluvial had brought them swarming into the district from all the other gold fields in the colony in such numbers that it was impossible to keep the almond-eyed mining locusts out, especially as the government was disposed to give them a measure of protection. Not from any unnatural sentiment, but purely because they were revenue producers, and the government badly wanted money. Then, too, their camps were so large, and so many of them were armed, and disposed to fight when in a corner, that the breaking up of a Chow's camp became more and more difficult, and in the end the white diggers had to be content with surprising outlying prospecting parties, chasing them with kangaroo dogs back to their main camp, and burning their huts and mining gear, after first making a careful search for gold, concealed under the earthen floor, or among their ill-smelling personal effects. Sometimes they were rewarded, sometimes not, but in either case they were satisfied that they were doing their duty to Queensland and themselves by harrying the heathen who raged so furiously, and were robbing the country of its gold. Then, after old Tai Ping had succumbed to too much digger's rest, and Finnerty, now Peter Grattan Finnerty Esq., member of the Legislative Assembly of Queensland, had left the flat and become the champion of the struggling white miner. In the house at a salary of £300 a year, came bad times, for the alluvial became worked out, and in parties of 2s and 3s the old hands began to leave, heading westward across the arid desert towards the Gilbert and the Etheridge rivers, dying of thirst, or under the spears of the blacks by the way, but ever heedless of what was before when the allurements and potentialities of a new field lay beyond the shimmering haze of the sandy horizon. Then, as the miners left, the few cockatoo settlers followed them, or shifted in nearer to the town on the sea-coast with their horse and bullock teams, and an ominous silence began to fall upon the flat when the tinkle of the cattle bells no longer was heard among the dark fringe of sighing she-oaks bordering the creek. As day by day the quietude deepened, the parrots and pheasants and squatter pigeons flew in and about the Leichhardt trees at the foot of the bluff, and wild duck at dusk came splashing into the Battery Dam, for there was now no one who cared to shoot them. The merry-faced, rollicking, horse-racing young bank manager and his baying pack of gaunt kangaroo dogs had vanished with the rest, and then came the day when but 8 men remained, 7 being old hands, and the 8th a stranger, who, with a black boy, had arrived the previous evening. And had it not been for the coming of the stranger, Chinkie's flat would, in a few weeks, have been left to solitude, and reported to the Goldfields warden as abandoned and duffered out. Chapter 2 Granger Makes a Deal. 3 years before, Edward Granger had been the leader of a small prospecting party which had done fairly well on the rivers debouching into the Gulf of Carpentaria from the western side of Cape York Peninsula. He was an Englishman, his mates were all Australian-born, vigorous, sturdy bushmen, inured to privation and hardship, and possessing unbounded confidence in their leader, though he was by no means the oldest man of the party, and not a native. But Granger had had great experience as an explorer and prospector, for he had been compelled to begin the battle of life when but a lad of 15. His father, once a fairly wealthy squatter in the colony of Victoria, was ruined by successive droughts, and died leaving his station deeply mortgaged to the bank, which promptly foreclosed, and Mrs. Granger found herself and 2 daughters dependent upon her only son, a boy of 15, for a living. He, however, was equal to the occasion. Leaving his mother and sisters in lodgings in Melbourne, he made his way to New South Wales with a mob of travelling cattle, earning his £1 a week in rations. At Sydney he worked on the wharves as a lumper, and then joined in the wild rush to the famous Tambaroora diggings, and was fortunate enough to meet with remunerative employment, and from then began his mining experiences, which in the course of the following 10 years took him nearly all over the Australian colonies, New Zealand, and Tasmania. Never making much money, and never very hard up, he had always managed to provide for his mother and sisters, and when he formed his prospecting party to Cape York and sailed from Brisbane, he knew that they would not suffer from any financial straits for at least 2 years. For nearly 3 years he and his party wandered from one river to another along the torrid shores of the Great Gulf, sometimes doing well, sometimes not getting enough gold to pay for the food they ate, but always hopeful of the day when they would strike it rich. Then came misfortune, sharp and sudden. Camped on the Batavia River during the wet season, the whole party of 5 sickened with malaria, and found themselves unable to move to the high land at the head of the river owing to all their horses having died from eating poison plant. Too weak to travel by land, they determined to build a raft and reach the mouth of the river, where there was a small cattle station. Here they intended to remain till the end of the rains, buy fresh horses and provisions, and return and prospect some of the deep gullies and watercourses at the head of the Batavia River. Scarcely had they completed the raft, and loaded it with their effects, when they were rushed by a mob of blacks, and in a few seconds 2 of the 5 were gasping out their lives from spear wounds, and all the others were wounded. Fortunately for the survivors, Granger had his revolver in his belt, and this saved them, for he at once opened fire on the savages, whilst the other men worked the raft out into the middle of the stream, where they were out of danger from spears and able to use their rifles. After a terrible voyage of 3 days, and suffering both from their wounds and the bone-racking agonies of fever, they at last reached the cattle station, where they were kindly received in the rough, hospitable fashion common to all pioneers in Australia. But when at the end of a month one of Granger's mates died of his wounds, and the other bade him good-bye and went off in a purling lugger to Thursday Island, the leader sickened of Cape York Peninsula, and turned his face southwards once more, in the hope that fortune would be more kind to him on the new rushes at the Clonkery, 700 miles away. From the station owner he bought 6 horses, and with but one black boy for a companion, started off on his long journey through country which for the most part had not yet been traversed even by the explorer. Traveling slowly, prospecting as he went, and adding a few ounces of gold here and there to the little bag he carried in his saddle pouch, quite 3 months passed ere he and the black boy reached the Clonkery. Here, however, he found nothing to tempt him. The field was overcrowded, and every day brought fresh arrivals, and so, after a week's spell, he once more set out, this time to the eastward towards the alluvial fields near the Batakin River, of which he had heard. It was at the close of a long day's ride over grassless, sun-smitten country, that he came in sight of Chinkie's Flat, and the welcome green of the sheoaks fringing Connolly's Creek and soughing to the wind. The quietness and verdancy of the creek pleased him, and he resolved to have a long spell, and try and get rid of the fever which had again attacked him and made his life a misery. Riding up to the hotel he found a party of some 20 or more diggers who were having a last carouse, for the benefit of the landlord, ere they bade good-bye to Chinkie's Flat on the following evening. Among them were 2 men who had become possessed of the ever-victorious battery, left to them by the recently deceased Taping, who had succumbed to alleged rum and bad whiskey. They jocularly offered Granger the entire plant for £25 and his horses. He made a laughing rejoinder, and said he would take a look at the machine in the morning. He meant to have a long spell, he said, and Chinkie's Flat would suit him better than Townsville or Port Denison to pull up, as hotels there were expensive, and he had not much money. Then, as was customary, he returned the drink he had accepted from them by shouting for all hands, and was at once voted a good sort. In the morning he walked down to the deserted battery, examined it carefully, and found that although it was in very bad order, and deficient especially in screens, the one greatest essential, it was still capable of a great deal of work. Then he washed off a dish or two of tailings from one of the many heaps about, and although he had no acid, nor any other means of making a proper test in such a short time, his scientific knowledge acquired on the big gold fields of the southern colonies and New Zealand showed him that there was a very heavy percentage of gold still to be won from the tailings by simple and inexpensive treatment. "I'll buy the thing," he said to himself. "I can't lose much by doing so, and there's every chance of saving a good deal of gold, if I once get some fine screens, and that will only take 6 weeks or so." By noon the deal was completed, and in exchange for £25 in cash, 6 horses and their saddler, Granger, amid much good-humored chaff from the vendors, took possession of the ever-victorious crushing mill, together with some thousands of tons of tailings. But when he announced his intention of putting the plant in order and crushing for the public, generally, as well as for himself, 6 men who yet had some faith in the field and believed that some of the many reefs would pay to work, elected to stay, especially when Granger said that if their crushings turned out duffers, he would charge them nothing for using the battery. At 1 o'clock that day there were but 8 Europeans and 1 black boy left on the once noisy Chinkie's flat, the landlord of the Digger's Best. 6 miners, Granger, and the black boy, Jackie, who had accompanied him on his arduous journey from the Batavia River. At Granger's request they all met at the public house, and sat down to a dinner of salt meat, damper, and tea, and after it was finished and each man had lit his pipe, Granger went into details. "Now, boys, this is how the thing hangs. I've bought the old rattletrap because I believe there's a lot of life in the old girl yet, and I'm going to spend all the money I have in putting her in order and getting some new gear up from Brisbane or Sydney. If I lose my money I won't grumble, but I don't think I shall lose it if you will agree to give some of the reefs a thorough good trial. As I told you, I won't ask you for a penny if the stone I crush for you turns out no good, but it is my belief, and I know what I am talking about, that there are 1,000 tons of surface stuff lying around this field which will give half an ounce to the ton if it is put through a decent machine. And I'm going to make the old Ever Victorious a pretty decent battery before long. But it's no good my spending my money, I possess only £400, if you don't back me up and lend a hand." "You're the man for us," said one of the men. "We'll stick to you and do all the bullocking. But the battery is very old, and we have the idea that old Taping wasn't much of a boss of a crushing mill, and didn't know much about amalgamation." Granger nodded. "I am sure of it. I don't believe that he saved more than 50% of the gold from the surface stuff he put through, and not more than 1/3 from the stone. Well, boys, what is it to be?" The men looked at each other for a moment or two, and then they one and all emphatically asserted their intention of remaining on the field, assisting Granger in repairing the plant and raising trial crushings of stone from every reef on the field. "That's all right then, boys," said Granger. "Now you go ahead and raise the stone, and as soon as I am a bit stronger I'll start off for the bay and buy what I want in the way of screens, grinding pans, quicksilver, and other gear. I'm almost convinced that with new, fine screens we shall get good results out of the stone, and if we are disappointed then well tackled that heap of tailings. I've seen a lot of tailings treated without being roasted in Victoria, and understand the process right enough." "Well, we'll do our share of yakker, mister," said a man named Dick Scott. "And I'll do mine. As soon as I am fit some of you must lend me a couple of horses, and I'll ride down to the bay. I dare say I can get all that we want there in the way of machinery without my going or sending to Brisbane for it." On the following morning work was started by the 6 men, the landlord of the public house agreeing to cook for all hands for the first week, while Granger and the black boy, though the former was still very weak from recurrent attacks of ague, tried numberless prospects from all parts of the heaps of tailings. At the end of a week the miners began to raise some very likely-looking stone, and Granger, finding some jars of muriatic acid among the stores belonging to the battery, made some further tests of the tailings with results which gave him the greatest satisfaction. He, however, said nothing about this to his new mates, intending to give them a pleasant surprise later on in the week before he left on his journey to the coast. At 6 o'clock one evening, just as the men were returning from the claim for supper, Jackie, the black boy, was seen coming along the track at a fast canter. He had been out looking for some cattle belonging to Jansen the landlord, which had strayed away among the ranges. "What's the matter, Jackie?" asked the men, as the boy jumped off his horse. "I been see him plenty feller Chinamen come along road. Altogether 31. Close to now, 'bout 1 feller mile away, I think it." Chapter 3 Jimmy Ah San. Consternation was depicted on the faces of the men, and they all began to question Jackie at once, until Granger appeared, and then the black boy gave them farther particulars. The Chinamen, he said, were all on foot, each man carrying 2 baskets on a stick, but there were also 5 or 6 pack horses loaded with picks, shovels, dishes, and other mining gear. "Curse the dirty, yellow-hided swine!" cried Dick Scott, turning excitedly to Granger. "What's to be done? They've come to rush the flat again, but by thunder! I'll be a stiff un afore a chow fills another dish with wash dirt on Connolly's Creek." "And me too! And me too!" growled the others angrily, and Granger, as he looked at their set, determined faces, knew they would soon be beyond control, and bloodshed would follow if the advancing Chinamen tried to come on to the field. But nevertheless, he was thoroughly in sympathy with them. The advent of these Chinese, probably but an advance guard of many hundreds, would simply mean ruination to himself and his mates, just as their prospects were so bright. The men looked upon him as their leader, and he must act, and act quickly. "Let them come along, boys. Then we'll bail them up as soon as they come abreast of us, and have a little talkie with them. But for heaven's sake try and keep cool, and I dare say when they see we look ugly at them, they'll trot on. How many of you have guns of any kind?" 4 rifles and 2 shotguns were quickly produced, and then every one waited till the first of the Chinese appeared, marching one behind the other. The foremost man was dressed in European clothes, and the moment Scott saw him, he exclaimed, "Why, it's Jimmy Ah San! I used to know him at Jimpai in the old times. He's not a bad sort of a chow. Come on, boys!" Granger, who was not just then well enough to go with them, but remained in his seat with his revolver on his knee, could not help smiling at the sudden halt and terrified looks of the Chinese, when Scott and the others drew up in front of them with their weapons at the present. Half of them at once dropped their baskets and darted off into the bush, the rest crowding together like a flock of terrified sheep. The leader, however, came steadily on. Scott stepped out and met him. "Good morning. What do you and all your crowd want here?" "Nothing," replied the Chinaman quietly, in excellent English. "Nothing but to get down to the creek and camp for a few days." "But why do you all come out with guns?" "We cannot do you any harm." "Just so. But we can do you a lot if you try on any games, Mr. Jimmy Ah San." "Ah, you know me then," said the man, looking keenly at Scott. "Yes, I do, and you're all right enough. But me and my mates is going to keep this field for white men. It ain't going to be no Chinamen's digging. So what's your move?" "Only what I said." "Look at my men! We do not want to stop here. We wish to push along to the coast. Some of them are dying from exhaustion, and my pack horses can hardly go another quarter of a mile." Soot scratched his chin meditatively, and then consulted with his mates. He, although so rough in his speech, was not a bad-natured man, and he could see that the Chinese were thoroughly done up, and worn down to skin and bone. Then presently Granger walked over and joined them, and heard what Ah San had to say. "I'm sorry that you are in such a bad fix," he said, "but you know as well as I do that if any of your men put a pick into ground here, there will be serious trouble, and if they lose their lives you will be responsible, and may perhaps lose your own." "I promise you that nothing like that will happen," replied the Chinaman. "My men are all diggers, it is true, but we will not attempt to stay on any field where we are not wanted. My name is James Ah San. I am a British subject, and have lived in Australia for 25 years. That man," pointing to Scott, "knows me, and can tell you that Jimmy Ah San never broke a promise to any man." "That is right enough," said Scott promptly. "Everyone in Jimpai knew you when you was storekeeping there, and said you was a good sort. We have come over 300 miles from the Clonkery," went on the Chinese leader, quickly seeing that Scott's remark had much impressed the other miners. The diggers there gave us 48 hours to clear out. The blacks killed 15 of us and speared 10 of my horses, and 6 more men died on the way. We can do no harm here. We only want to spell a week or 2 weeks. Poor devils, muttered Granger. Then he said to Ah San, Very well. Now you see the track going through that clump of sandalwood? Well, follow it and you'll come to a little ironstone ridge, where you'll find a good camping ground just over a big pool in the creek. There's a bit of sweet grass, too, for your horses, so they can get a good feed tonight. In the morning this black boy will, if you like, show you a place in the ranges, about 4 miles from here, where you can let them run for a week. There's some fine grass and plenty of water, and they ought to pick up very quickly. But you will have to keep someone to see that they don't get round the other side of the range, through one of the gaps. If they do, you'll lose them to a dead certainty, for there are 2 or 3 mobs of brumbies, running there. Do you want any tucker? No, thank you, replied Ah San, with an unmistakable inflection of gratitude in his voice. We have plenty of rice and tea, but I should like to buy a bullock tomorrow, if I can. I saw some cattle about 2 miles from here. Is there a cattle station near here? No, the cattle you saw belong to one of us, this man here, pointing to Jansen. We'll sell you a beast tomorrow, I dare say. Then the armed protectors of the integrity from foreign invasion of the rights of Chinkie's Flat nodded, good evening, to Ah San, and walked back across the road to the Digger's Best, and the Chinamen, with silent, childlike patience, resumed their loads and trotted along after their leader. They disappeared over the hill, and ere darkness descended the glare of their campfires was casting steady gleams of light upon the dark waters of the still pool beneath the ridge. Chapter 4. Granger and Jimmy Ah San talked together. It was 8 o'clock in the morning, and Jimmy Ah San, a fat, pleasant-faced Chinaman, dressed in European costume, came outside his tent, and filling his pipe, sat down on the ground, and with his hands clasped on his knees saw 6 of the white men emerge from 2 or 3 humpies, and walk down to the new shaft to begin work. He was well acquainted with the previous history of the spot upon which he was now gazing, and something like a scowl darkened his good-humored face as he looked upon the ragged, half-famished survivors of his company, and thought of the past horrors and hardships of the fearful journey from the Cloncarty. 15 of their number had been murdered by blacks in less than a fortnight, and the bones of half a dozen more, who had succumbed to exhaustion or thirst, lay bleaching on a strip of desert country between the Cloncarty and the Biddekin River. But Ah San was a man of courage, and resource as well, and his 25 years' experience of bush and mining life in the far north of Australia enabled him to pilot the remainder of his men by forced marches to the Cape River, where they had spelled for a month so as to gain strength for the long stage between that river and Connolly's Creek, on one of the deserted fields of which he hoped to settle and retrieve his broken fortunes. As he sat and watched and thought, 8 or 10 members of his company came and crouched near him, gazing with hungry eyes at the heaps of mullock and the mounds of tailings surrounding the ever-victorious battery, watching the Europeans at work, and wondering when they, too, would give it up and follow their departed comrades. For the Chinamen knew that those dry and dusty heaps of mullock and gray and yellow sand, on which the death adder and the black-necked tiger snake now coiled themselves to sleep in the noonday sun, still contained gold enough to reward patient industry of which the foreign devils were not capable when the result would be but 5 pennyweights a day, washed out in the hot waters of the creek under a sky of brass. With flour at £2.10 per 50 pounds, bag, as Dick Scott said. Presently, turning to a sun-baked, lanky Chinaman near him, his lieutenant, he bade him tell the men to prepare to go down to the creek, and drag some of the pools with a small seine. There are many fish in all these creeks which run into the great river, the Biddekin, but I will first go to the foreigners and ask their permission. The tall, sick man is well disposed towards us, and we must be patient and submit to the tyranny of the others for a little while. But all may yet be well with us if I can but get speech of him alone. Meanwhile, keep the company under close watch. Let no man wander from the camp till I return. Then entering his tent, he took from a canvas pack-bag a small bottle, put it in his coat pocket, and descending the ridge, walked towards the Digger's Best. As he drew near, Granger, followed by the landlord, came out of the house and sat down on rudely made reclining chairs, composed of 2 pieces of sapling, with cross pieces, from which was slung a flour sack. "Good morning, gentlemen," said the Chinaman politely. "Good morning," they replied civilly, and then Granger, who was wearing a heavy overcoat, for the chill of an attack of ague was near, asked him to sit down and inquired how his men were. "They are getting on very well, thank you, sir," replied Ah San. "But several of them are very weak, and will not be fit to travel for a fortnight unless we carry them. But the rest will do them much good, especially if they get a change of food. I have come now to ask you if you and your mates will let us drag some of the pools in the creek for fish. We have a small net." "Certainly," replied Jansen. "Some fish will do them good, and the pools are alive with them now that the creek is so low. And anyway, we don't want to stop you from getting food, do we, Mr. Granger?" "Certainly not. We have no earthly right to prevent you from taking fish in the creek, and even if we had, we should not use it. We are not brutes." "Thank you very much," said Ah San, and then, addressing himself to the landlord, he asked him if he had a bullock to sell. Jansen was an alert business man at once. He had a small herd of cattle running wild about the creek, and was only too glad to sell a beast. "You can have any bullock you like, the biggest in the lot, for a $5, but cash down." The Chinaman pulled out his purse, handed him a £5 note, and asked when he could have the beast. "In about an hour, if you want to kill right off, but you ought not to kill till sundown in such weather as this. But anyway, I'll saddle up and get a man to help me run the mob into the stockyard. Then you can pick one out for yourself. There's half a dozen bullocks, and some fine young fat cows, so you can have your choice." In a few minutes the landlord had caught and saddled 2 horses, and riding one, and leading the other, he went off to the news shaft, where the spare horse was mounted by one of the men working there. Then Ah San turned to the sick man, and said interrogatively, "You have fever?" "Yes, I caught it up Normanton way in the Gulf country 6 months ago, and thought I was getting clear of it, but a month back it came on again, and I have been pretty bad ever since." "I can see that, and the Gulf kind of fever is bad, very bad. I know all about it, for I lived in the Gulf country for 10 years, and have had it myself. Now, here is some medicine which will do you good. It will cure you in 10 days if you take a dose every time you feel the shakes coming on. But you must not eat more than you can help." "Thank you," said Granger eagerly, as he took the bottle. "It is very kind of you. But you may want it yourself? I have 3 or 4 more bottles left. I had a dozen from the doctor at Georgetown on the Etheridge River. He is a man who knows all about fever, and I can assure you that you will be a well man in 10 days. Show me your hand, please." The European extended his hand languidly to the Chinaman, who looked at the fingernails for a moment or two. "You will have the shakes in a few hours?" "Yes. They generally come on as soon as the sun gets pretty high, about 9 or 10 o'clock. Then you must take a dose now. Can I go inside and get a glass and some water?" "Yes, certainly. It is very good of you to take so much trouble." Returning with a glass and some water, the Chinaman poured out a dose of the mixture, and with a smile of satisfaction watched the sick man drink it. Then Granger and his visitor began to talk, at first on general matters such as the condition of the country between the Cloncurry and the Budekin, and then about Chinkie's flat, its past glories and its present condition. The frank, candid manner of Ah San evoked a similar freedom of speech from the Englishman, who recognized that he was talking to an intelligent and astute man who knew more about the far north of Queensland and its gold fields than he did himself. Then Ah San saw the opportunity for which he had been waiting, and drawing his seat nearer to Granger's he spoke earnestly to him, told him exactly of the situation of himself and his company, and ended up by making him a certain proposition regarding the working of the abandoned claims, and the restarting of the rusting and weather-worn, ever victorious, battery. Granger listened intently, nodding his head now and then as Ah San emphasized some particular point. At the end of an hour's conversation they heard the cracking of the landlord's stock whip and the bellowing of cattle as they crossed the creek, and the Chinaman rose and held out his hand. "Then good morning, Mr. Granger. I hope you will be able to convince your mates that we can all pull together. I am sure of it. We are all pretty hard up. And you and your men can help us, and we can help you. Come down again tonight, and I'll tell you the result of my talk with them. Chapter 5: The Resurrection of the Ever Victorious. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Granger was seated at one end of the rough dining table in the digger's best, with some papers laid before him. At the other end was Dick Scott, and the rest of the men sat on either side, smoking their pipes, and wondering what was in the wind. Granger did not keep them waiting long. Taking his pipe of his month, and laying it on the table, he went into business at once. He spoke to them as if he were one of themselves, adopting a simplicity of language and manner that he knew would appeal to their common sense and judgment far more than an elaborately prepared speech. Now, boys, I've got something to say, and I'll say it as quick as I can. None of you know anything of me beyond what I have told you myself, but I don't think any one of you will imagine I'm a man who would try to ring in a swindle on you when I bought the old rattletrap down there. Go ahead, mister, said Dick Scott. We didn't think no such thing. We only thought you was chucking away your money pernicious. Granger laughed so heartily that his hearers followed suit. Then he went on. No, I'm not throwing my money away, boys. I am going to make money on this field, and so are you. But there are not enough of us. We want more men, wages men, and presently I'll explain why we shall want them. But first of all, let me show you what I obtained the other day out of between 200 and 250 pounds, weight of those tailings. He rose, went into the second room, and returned with a small enamel dish, and placed it upon the table. The miners rose and gathered round, and saw lying on the bottom about 1 ounce and a quarter of fine powdery gold. Holy Moses! Cried one of them, as he drew his forefinger through the bright yellow dust. There's more than 1 ounce there. There is, affirmed Granger. There are 25 pennyweights, and all that came out of not more than 250 pounds of tailings. The men looked at each other with eyes sparkling with excitement, and then Granger poured the gold out upon a clean plate for closer examination. Why, exclaimed Scott, that means those tailings would go 10 ounces to the ton. Just so, said Granger. But we can't get those 10 ounces out of them by ordinary means, though with new screens, new tables and blankets I am pretty sure we can get 4 ounces to the ton. But we want the 10, don't we? You bet, was the unanimous response. Well, I'll guarantee that we shall get 8 ounces at least. But first of all I'll tell you how I got the result. You can try some of the stuff in the morning, and you will find that those tailings will pan out about 8 or 10 ounces to the ton. But acid is mighty dear stuff, said Scott. Just so, but it is very good as a test, and of course we are not such duffers as to try to treat more than a couple of 1,000 tons of tailings with acid. We'd die of old age before we finished. Now I'll get on and tell you what I do propose. You remember that I said I had seen tailings treated in Victoria without roasting. Well, we could do that now, though we should only get half the gold and lose the other half in the sludge pits. Now, as I told you, I have about 400 pounds worth of alluvial gold, which I brought with me from the north, and which I can sell to any bank in the bay. I intended when I bought the Ever Victorious to spend this 400 pounds in buying some fine screens, a couple of grinding pans, and some other gold-saving machinery, so that when I was not crushing stone for you men I could be running those tailings through. But we can do better, now that the Chinamen are here. Something like dismay was depicted on the men's faces when they heard this, but no one interrupted as he went on. We can do much better. Instead of treating those tailings by simply running them through the screens again and losing half the gold, we can build a proper roasting farneo, and then we can grind them, keeping the stampers for crushing alone. This morning I had a long yarn with Ah San, the boss Chinaman, and he is willing to let us have as many of his men as we want for 25 shillings a week each, and indenture them to me for 6 months. There's the labor we want, right to our hand. It's cheap labor, I admit, but that is no concern of ours. The chows, so Ah San tells me, will be only too glad to get a 6 months' job at 25 bob a week, of which he takes half. Aye, said Scott contemptuously. They're only bloomin' slaves. To their boss, no doubt, but not to us. They will be well pleased to work for us and earn what they consider good wages. I propose that we get at least 20 of them and set them to work right away. There is any amount of good clay here, I know, and we'll start them digging. I know how to build a brick kiln, and we'll get a proper bricklayer up from the bay, and I guarantee that by the time the new machinery is up that the roasting furnace will be built. No need to get a bricklayer from the bay and pay him about £8 a week, said a man named Arthur O'Hare. I'm a bricklayer by trade. Bully for you, said Granger. Will you take £4 a week to put up the furnace and chimney? I'm willing if my mates are. Well, boys, that's pretty well all I have to say. We'll build the roasting furnace. The Chinamen will do all the bullocking, both at that and the battery, and we'll put on half a dozen to help at the new shaft. I'll boss the battery, drive the engine, and do the amalgamating, and you men can go on roasting stone. Every Saturday we'll stop the battery and clean her up, and at the end of every 4 weeks we'll send the gold to the bank and go shares in the plunder. Now tell me, what do you think? Do you think it's a fair proposition? After a very brief consultation together, Scott, speaking on behalf of his mates, said they were all willing, and not only willing, but pleased to come in with him, but they thought that he would only be acting fairly to himself if he, as manager of the battery, amalgamator, and general supervisor of the whole concern, took a salary of £10 a week. No, boys. I'll take £6 if you like. Of course, however, you will not object to refunding me the money I am expending on the new machinery. As for the profits, we shall divide equally. Well then, said Scott, banging his brawny fist on the table and turning to his mates, if you treats us in that generous way, we must do the same with you as regards the stone we raise. Boys, I proposes that as our new mate is finding the money to start the old battery again, and going even shares with us in the gold from the tailings, that we go even shares with him in whatever gold we get from the claims. Right, was the unanimous response. And then they all came up one by one and shook hands with Granger, whose face flushed with pleasure. Then Jansen produced a bottle of rum and Granger gave them a toast. Boys, here's good luck to us all, and here's to the day when we shall hear the stampers banging away in the boxes and the ever-victorious be as victorious as she was in the good old days of the field. Chapter 6. Magnetic Villa. Magnetic Villa was one of the best houses in the rising city of Townsville. It stood on the red, rocky, and treeless side of Melton Hill, overlooked the waters of Cleveland Bay, and faced the rather picturesque-looking island from whence it derived its name. About 10 months after the resurrection of the ever-victorious, and the concomitant reawakening to life of Chinkie's flat, 3 ladies arrived by steamer from Sydney to take possession of the villa, then untenanted. In a few hours it was generally known that the newcomers were Mrs. Trapping, Miss Trapping, and Miss Lilla Trapping. There was also a Master Trapping, a lanky, ill-looking, spotted-faced youth of 14, in exceedingly new and badly fitting clothes much too large for him. By his mother and sisters he was addressed as Mordaunt, though until a year or so previously his name had been Jimmy. A few weeks after the ladies had installed themselves in the villa there appeared a special advertisement in the Townsville Champion, over the leader, informing the public that Mrs. Lee Trapping is prepared to receive a limited number of paying guests at Magnetic Villa, elegant appointments, superior cuisine, and that comfort and hospitality which can only be obtained in a highly refined family circle. "Hello," said Mallard, the editor of the Champion, to Flynn, his sub, who called his attention to the advertisement. "So Magnetic Villa is turned into a hash house, eh? Wonder who they are. Highly refined family circle, sounds fishy, doesn't it? Do you know anything about them?" "No, but old McLean, the Melbourne drummer who came up in the barcoo from Sydney with them, does. At least he knew the old man, who died about a year and a half ago." "What was he?" "Bank messenger in Sydney at 30 bob a week, used to lend money to the clerks at high interest, and did very well, for when he pegged out he left the old woman a couple of thousand. His name was Trapham, John Trapham, but he was better known as Old Jack Trapp. When they came on board the barcoo they put on no end of side, and they were the Mrs. and Master Lee Trapping. Lord! What a joke! Did the drummer give the show away on board?" No, for a wonder. But he told me of it. Daughter's good looking? Younger one is not too bad. Elder's a terror, thin, bony, long face, long nose, long feet, long conceit of herself, and pretty long age, walks mincingly, like a hen on a hot griddle, and— Oh, stop it! The old woman? Fat, ruddy-faced, pleasant-looking, white hair, talks of her poor populous girls, and see, she's a pushing old geyser, however, and has already got the parsons and some of the other local nobility to call on her. Wonder what sort of tucker they'd give one, Flynn? I'm tired of paying £6 a week at the beastly overcrowded dog kennel, entitled the Royal Hotel, save the mark, and I'm game even to try a boarding house, but— and here he rubbed his chin. This refined family circle business, you know? They all say that, remarked the sub. You couldn't expect 'em to tell the truth and say, in Paradise Mansions, Mrs. De Jones feeds her boarders on anything cheap and nasty. The toilet jugs have no handles, and the floors are as dirty as the kitchen slave, who does the cooking and waits at table, and the family generally are objectionable in their manners and appearance. Are you game to come with me this afternoon and inspect Magnetic Villa and the refined family circle? Yes. And, by Jove! If you take up your quarters there, I will do so as well. We could try it anyway. I'm batching with Battray, the police inspector, and 3 other fellows. It was only going to cost us £3 a week each. It costs us more like £6. Of course, too much liquor and all that, said the editor of the Champion, with a merry twinkle in his eye. Scarcely had the sub-editor left when a knock announced another visitor, and Granger, booted and spurred, entered the room. Mallard jumped from his chair and shook hands warmly with him. This is a surprise, Granger. When did you get to town? About an hour ago. Myra is with me. Her 6 months' visit has come to an end, and my mother and my elder sister want her back again, so she is leaving in the next steamer. But all the hotels are packed full, and as the steamer does not leave for a week, I don't know how to manage. That's why I came to see you, thinking you might know of some place where we could put up for a week. I shall be only too delighted to do all I can. The town is very full of people just now, and the hotels are perfect pandemoniums, what with Chinkie's Flat, the Rush to the Houghton, Black Gully, and other places. Townsville is off its head with bibulous prosperity, and lodgings of any kind fit for a lady are unobtainable. Ah, stop! I've forgotten something. I do know of a place which might suit Miss Granger very well. Where is she now? In the alleged sitting-room at the Queen's. I gave the head waiter a sovereign to let her have it to herself for a couple of hours whilst I went out and saw what I could do. Then Mallard told Granger of Magnetic Villa. Let us go and see this refined family, he said with a laugh. I don't know them, but from what my sub tells me, I dare say Miss Granger could manage with them for a week. I know the house, which has 2 advantages. It is large, and is away from this noisy, dirty, dusty, and sinful town. Very well, said Granger as he took out his pipe. Will 3 o'clock suit? My sister might come. Of course. Now tell me about Chinkie's flat. Any fresh news? Nothing fresh. Same old thing. Same old thing. And Mallard spread out his arms yearningly, and rolled his eyes towards the ceiling. Just listen to the man, oh ye gods! The same old thing! That means you are making a fortune hand over fist, you and Jimmy San. We are certainly making a lot of money, Mallard, replied Granger quietly, as he lit his pipe and crossed his strong, sun-tanned hands over his knee. My own whack, so far, out of Chinkie's flat, has come to more than £16,000. Don't say whack, Granger, it's vulgar. Say my own emolument, derived in less than 1 year from the auriferous wealth of Chinkie's flat, amounts to £16,000. You'll be going to London soon, and floating the property for £1 million, and— Granger, who knew the man well, and had a sincere liking and respect for him, laughed again, though his face flushed. You know me better than that, Mallard. I'm not the man to do that sort of thing. I could float the concern and make perhaps 100,000 or so out of it if I was blackguard enough to do it. But thank God I've never done anything dirty in my life, and never will. Don't mind my idiotic attempt at a joke, Granger. And Mallard pat his hand. I know you are the straightest man that ever lived. But I did really think that you would be going off to England soon, and that I mean the other real friends beside myself you have made in this godforsaken colony, would know you no more except by reading of your movements in London. No, Mallard, Australia is my home. I know nothing of England, for I left there when I was a child. As I told you, my poor father was one of the biggest sheep men in Victoria, and died soon after the bank foreclosed on him. The old station, which he named Melinda Downs, after my mother, who has the good old-fashioned name of Melinda, has gone through a lot of vicissitudes since then. But a few weeks ago my agent in Sydney bought it for £10,000, and now my mother and sisters are going back there. And yourself? Oh, a year or two more, perhaps 3 or 4, and then, when Chinkie's flat is worked out, I too will go south to the old home. Mallard sighed, and then, taking a cigar, lit it, and the two men smoked together in silence for a few minutes. Mallard? Yes, old man. This continual newspaper grind is pretty tough, isn't it? Yes, it is. But thanks to you, by putting me on to the day-dawn reef at Chinkie's flat, I've made 1,000 or 2 and can chuck it at any time. Don't say chuck, it's vulgar, and the editor of the leading journal in North Queensland must not be vulgar. And he smiled. Ah, Granger, my boy, you have been a good friend to me. It's the other way about, Mallard. You were the only man in the whole colony of Queensland who stood to me when I began to employ Chinese labor. That ruffian, Peter Finnerty, said in the House, only 2 months ago, that I deserved to be shot. Well, you stuck to your guns, and I to mine. Fortunately, the champion is my own rag, and not owned by a company. I stuck to you as a matter of principle, and lost heavily by it. For 6 months or so. A lot of people withdrew their advertisements, but they were a bit surprised when at the end of that time they came back to me, and I refused to insert their ads. At any price. I consider that you not only did wisely, but right, in employing the Chinamen. Are they going on satisfactorily? Very. They do work for me at 25 shillings a week that white men would not do at all, no matter what you offered them, emptying sludge pits, building dams, etc. Exactly. And now all the people who rose up and howled at you for employing Chinamen, and the champion for backing you up, are shouting themselves hoarse in your praise. And the revival of Chinkie's flat, and the new rushes all round about it, have added very materially to the wealth of this town. After a little further conversation, Granger went back to the Queen's Hotel, where Mallard was to call at 3 o'clock. Myra Granger, a small, slenderly built girl of 19, looked up as he entered the sitting-room. Any success, Ted? Here, look at this advertisement. Mallard knows the place, but not the people. He's coming here at 3, and we'll all go and interview Mrs. Trapham, which her real name is Trapham, I believe. I shall be glad to see Mr. Mallard again. I like him. In fact, I liked him before I ever saw him for the way in which he fought for you. And I'm strongly of the opinion that Mr. Thomas Mallard has a very strong liking for Miss Myra Granger. Then I like him still more for that. Granger patted his sister's cheek. He is a good fellow, Myra. I think he will ask you to marry him. I certainly expect it, Ted. Chapter 7. Sheila Carolyn. Although Mrs. Trapham had been so short a time in Townsville, she had contrived to learn a very good deal, not only about people in the town itself, but in the surrounding districts, and knew that Granger was a wealthy mine owner, had a sister staying with him on a visit, and was a bachelor. She also knew that Mallard was the editor of the Champion, and was likewise a bachelor. In fact, she had acquired pretty well all the information that could be acquired, her informant being the talkative, scandal-mongering wife of the Episcopalian curate. She was therefore highly elated when at 4 o'clock in the afternoon Miss Granger and her brother, and Mallard, after a brief inspection of the rooms, which were really handsomely furnished, took 3 of the largest and a private sitting-room, at an exorbitant figure, for a week, and promised to be at the villa that evening for dinner. He's immensely rich, Juliet, she said to her daughter. She was speaking of Granger after he had gone. And you must do your best, your very best. Wear something very simple, as it is the first evening, and be particularly nice to his sister. I'm sure he's very fond of her. She'll only be here a week, but he and Mr. Mallard will probably be here a month. So now you have an excellent chance. Don't throw it away by making a fool of yourself." Juliet, who had been christened Julia, and called Judy, for 32 years of her life, set her thin lips and then replied acidly. "It's all very well for you to talk, but whenever I did have a chance, which was not often, you spoiled it by your interference. And if you allow Jimmy to sit at the same table with us tonight, he'll simply discuss these new people. When you call him Mordaunt, the hideous little wretch grins, and he grins too when you call me Juliet and Lizzie Lilla." Mrs. Trapping's fat face scowled at her daughter, and she was about to make an angry retort when the front door bell rang. "A lady wants to see yes, ma'am," said the new chum, Irish housemaid, who had answered the door. "Did you show her into the reception room, Mary?" "Sure, and is it the wee room with the stuffed bird in the fireplace, or is it the one beyant with the grain carpet on the floor, because I'm after putting her in the one with the stuffed bird? Anyway, it's a lady she is, sure enough, and it's little she'll moin where she do be waitin' on yes. Did she send in her card, Mary? Did she send in her what?" "Her card, you stupid girl. Don't you be after miscallin' me, ma'am. Sure, I can get 40 shillings a week anywhere and not be insulted by any one, instead av 30 here, which I do be thinkin' is not the place to shoot me." And the indignant daughter of the Emerald Isle, a fresh-complexioned, handsome young woman, tossed her pretty head and marched out. So Mrs. Trapping went into the room, with the stuffed bird in it, and there rose to meet her a fair-haired girl of about 18, with long-lashed, dark gray eyes, and a somewhat worn and drawn expression about her small mouth, as if she were both mentally and physically tired. Her dress was of the simplest, a neatly fitting dark blue, tailor-made gown. "I saw your advertisement in the Champion this morning," she said, "and called to ascertain your terms." Mrs. Trapping's big, protruding, and offensive pale blue eyes stared at and took in the girl's modest attire and her quiet demeanor as a shark looks at an unsuspecting or disabled fish which cannot escape its maws. "Please sit down," she said with a mingled ponderous condescension and affability. "I did not advertise. I merely notified in the Champion that I would receive paying guests. But my terms are very exclusive." "What are they?" 5 guineas a week exclusive of extras, which, in this place, amount to quite a guinea more. You could not afford that, I suppose?" The dark gray eyes flashed, and then looked steadily at those of the fishy blue. "Your terms are certainly very high, but I have no option. I find it impossible to get accommodation in Townsville. I only arrived from Sydney this morning in the Courier, and as I am very tired, I should like to rest in an hour or so, as soon as you can conveniently let me have my room." And taking out her purse, she placed a £5 note, a sovereign, and 6 shillings on the table. "Will you allow me to pay you in advance?" she said, with a tinge of sarcasm in her clear voice. "I will send my luggage up presently." Mrs. Trapping at once became most affable. She had noticed that the purse the girl had produced was literally stuffed with new £5 notes. "May I send for it?" she said beamingly. "And will you not stay and go to your room now?" "No, thank you," was the cold reply. "I have some business to attend to first. Can you tell me where Mr. Mallard, the editor of the Champion, lives? I know where the office is, but as it is a morning paper, I should not be likely to find him there at this early hour." Mrs. Trapping was at once devoured with curiosity. "How very extraordinary! Mr. Mallard was here only half an hour ago with a Mr. Granger and Miss Granger. They are coming here to stay for a few weeks." The girl's fair face lit up. "Oh, indeed! I am sorry I was not here, as I particularly wished to see Mr. Granger also. I had no idea that he was in Townsville, and was calling on Mr. Mallard, who, I know, is a friend of his, to ascertain when he was likely to be in town. They will all be here for dinner, miss. My name is Caroline." And taking out her card case, she handed Mrs. Trapping a card on which was inscribed, "Miss Sheila Caroline." "Then Mr. Granger is a friend of yours?" said Mrs. Trapping inquisitively, thinking of the poor chance Juliet would have with such a Richmond in the field as Miss Sheila Caroline. "No, I have never even seen him." said the girl stiffly, and then she rose. Then you will send for my luggage, Mrs. Trapping? With pleasure, Miss Caroline. But will you not look at your room, and join my daughter and myself in our afternoon tea? No, thank you. I think I shall first try and see either Mr. Mallard or Mr. Granger. Do you know where Mr. Mallard lives? At the Royal Hotel in Flinders Street. My daughter Lilla will be delighted to show you the way. But Miss Sheila Caroline was stubborn, and declined the kind offer, and Mrs. Trapping, whose curiosity was now at such a pitch that she was beginning to perspire, saw her visitor depart, and then called for Juliet. I wonder who she is and what she wants to see Mr. Granger for, she said excitedly, as she mopped her florid face. Doesn't know him, and yet wants to see him particularly. There is something mysterious about her. What is she like? Asked Miss Trapping eagerly. I didn't see her face, but her clothes are all right, I can tell you. She knew all about clothes, having been a forewoman in a Sydney drapery establishment for many years. Oh, a little, common-looking thing, but uppish. I wonder what on earth she does want to see Mr. Granger for? Half an hour later, when Miss Caroline's luggage arrived, it was duly inspected and criticized by the whole Trapping family. Each trunk bore a painted address. Miss Caroline, Minerva Downs, Dalrymple, North Queensland. Now where in the world is Minerva Downs? Said Mrs. Trapping. And why on earth is she going there? And her name too, Caroline, Sheila Caroline. I suppose she's a Jewess. Indeed, and it's not that she is, ma'am, whatever it means, indignantly broke in Mary, who had helped to carry in the luggage, and now stood erect with flaming face and angry eyes. Sure and I too'd yes she was a lady, and Annie wan could see she was a lady, and Caroline is one avy the best names in Ireland, indeed it is. You may leave the room, Mary, said Miss Trapping loftily. Leave the room, is it, miss? Without meaning any disrespect to yez, I might as well be telling yez that I'm ready to lave the place entirely, and so is the cook and stableman, and the gardener. Sure none avy us, having been used to the gintry, want to stay in a place where we do be getting talked at all day. The prospect of all her servants leaving simultaneously was too awful for Mrs. Trapping to contemplate. So she capitulated. Don't be so hasty, Mary. I suppose, then, that Miss Caroline is an Irishwoman? She is that, indeed. Sore in her swate face told me so before she spoke to me at all. Then you must look after her once very carefully, Mary. She will only be here for a few weeks. Mary's angry eyes softened. I will that, ma'am. Sure she's a sweet young lady with the best blood in her, I'm thinking dot. Miss Trapping sniffed. Chapter 8 Myra and Sheila. There was nothing mysterious about Sheila Caroline. Her story was a very simple one. Her parents were both dead, and she had no relatives, with the exception of an aunt, and with her she had lived for the last 5 years. The two, however, did not agree very well, and Sheila, being of a very independent spirit, and possessing a few £100 of her own, frankly told her relative that she intended to make her own way in the world. There was living in North Queensland a former great friend of her mother's, a Mrs. Farrow, whose husband was the owner of a large cattle station near Dalrymple, and to her she wrote asking her if she could help her to obtain a situation as a governess. 6 weeks later she received a warmly worded and almost affectionate letter. With the letter was enclosed a cheque for £50 on a Sydney bank. As the girl descended Melton Hill into hot, dusty, and noisy Flinders Street, she smiled to herself as she thought how very much she had stimulated the curiosity of Mrs. Trapping, to whom she had, almost unconsciously, taken an instinctive dislike. As she entered the crowded vestibule of the Royal Hotel, a group of men, diggers, sugar planters, storekeepers, bankers, ship captains, and policemen, who were all laughing hilariously at some story which was being told by one of their number, at once made a lane for her to approach the office, for ladies, especially young and pretty ladies, were few in comparison to the men in North Queensland in those days, and a murmured whisper of admiration was quite audible to her, as she made her inquiry of the clerk. No, Mr. Mallard is with Mr. and Miss Granger at the Queen's. He left here a few minutes ago. May I show you the way, miss? said a huge bearded man, who, booted and spurred, took off his hat to her in an awkward manner. I'm Dick Scott, one of Mr. Granger's men. Thank you, replied Sheila. It is very kind of you. And escorted by the burly digger, she went out into the street again. Are you Miss Caroline, ma'am? Said her guide to her respectfully, as he tried to shorten his lengthy strides. Yes, my name is Caroline, she replied, trying to hide a smile. Thought so, ma'am. I heerd the boss tellin' Miss Granger as you would be comin' to Chinkie's on your way up to Minvy Downs. Here's the Queen's, miss, and there's the boss and his sister and Mr. Mallard on the veranda there havin' a cooler. And then, to her amusement and Granger's astonishment, Mr. Dick Scott introduced her. This is Miss Caroline, boss. I picked her up at the Royal. And then, without another word, he marched off again with a proud consciousness of having done the perlite thing. I am Sheila Caroline, Mr. Granger. I was at the Royal asking for Mr. Mallard when Mr. Scott kindly brought me here. I am delighted to meet you, Miss Caroline, said Granger, who had risen and extended his hand. I had not the slightest idea you had arrived. And then he introduced her to his sister and Mallard. Now, Miss Caroline, please let me give you a glass of this. It is simply lovely and cold, said Myra, pouring some champagne into a glass with some crashed ice in it. My brother is the proud possessor of a big but rapidly diminishing lump of ice, which was sent to him by the captain of the Korea just now. Thank you, Miss Granger. I really am very thirsty. I have had quite a lot of walking about today. I have a letter to you, Mr. Mallard, from Mrs. Farrow. And she handed the missive to him. I am so very sorry I did not know of your arrival, Miss Caroline, said Mallard. I would have met you on board, but, as a matter of fact, I did not expect you in the Korea, as she is a very slow boat. I was anxious to get to Mrs. Farrow, Sheila explained, and so took the first steamer. Where are you staying, Miss Caroline? Asked Myra. Oh, I've been very fortunate. I have actually secured a room at Magnetic Villa, on Melton Hill. In fact, I went there just after you had left. Myra clapped her hands with delight. Oh, how lovely! I shall be there for a week, and my brother and Mr. Mallard are staying there as well. So Mrs. Lee Trapham informed me, said Sheila with a bright smile. Mallard, an irrepressible joker and mimic, at once threw back his head, crossed his hands over his chest, and bowed in such an exact imitation of Mrs. Trapham that a burst of laughter followed. Now you two boys can run away and play marbles for a while, as Miss Caroline and I want to have a little talk before we go to the refined family circle for dinner, said Myra to her brother. It is now 6 o'clock, our luggage has gone up, and so, if you will come back for us in half an hour, we will let you escort us there, to the envy of all the male population of this horrid, dusty, noisy town. Very well, said Granger with a laugh. Mallard and I will contrive to exist until then. And the two men went off into the billiard room. Now, Miss Caroline, said the lively Myra, as she opened the door of the sitting room and carried in the table on which were the glasses, champagne bottle, and ice. We'll put these inside first. The sight of that ice will make every man who may happen to see it, and who knows Ted, come and introduce himself to me. Oh, this is a very funny country. I'm afraid it rather shocked you to see me drinking champagne on an hotel veranda in full view of passers-by. But really, the whole town is excited, it has gold fever on the brain, and then all the men are so nice, although their free and easy ways used to astonish me considerably at first. But diggers especially are such manly men, you know what I mean. Oh, quite. I know I shall like North Queensland. There were quite a number of diggers on board the Korea, and one night we held a concert in the saloon and I sang the Kerry dance. I'm an Irishwoman, and next morning a big man named O'Hagan, one of the steerage passengers, came up and asked me if I would mind acceptin' a wee bit avia stone, and he handed me a lovely specimen of quartz with quite 2 ounces of gold in it. He told me he had found it on the Shotover River, in New Zealand. I didn't know what to say or do at first, and then he paid me such a compliment that I fairly tingled all over with vanity. Sure, and you'll take the wee bit avia stone from me, miss, he said. I'm a Kerry man myself, and when I heard yez singin', the Carey dance? Myself and half a dozen more men from the old sod felt that if he were a man we'd have carried Yez around the deck in a chair. How nice of him, said Myra. But they are all like that. Nearly every one of my brother's men at Chinkie's flat gave me something in the way of gold specimens when I left there. Then, resumed Sheila, in the afternoon all the steerage passengers sent me and the captain what they call a round robin, and asked if he would let them have a concert in the steerage, and if I would sing. And we did have it, on the deck, and I had to sing that particular song 3 times. I wish I had been there. Do you know, Miss Caroline, that big man who brought you here, Dick Scott, rough and uneducated as he is a gentleman. On our way down from Chinkie's flat we had to swim our horses across the Ross River, which was in flood. When we reached the other side I was, of course, wet through, and my hair had come down, and I looked like a half-drowned cat, I suppose. There is a public house on this side of the Ross, and we went there at once to change our clothes, which were in canvas saddle bags on a pack-horse, and came over dry. The public house was full of people, among whom were 3 commercial travelers, who were doing what is called painting the place red. They were all half intoxicated. As I came in wet and dripping they leered at me, and one of them said, "Look at the sweet little ducky, poor little darling, with her pitty ickle facey wassy all wet and coldy-woldy." Ted was not near me at the time, but Scott heard, and 10 minutes later, as I was changing my clothes I heard a dreadful noise, and the most awful language, and then a lot of cheering. I dressed as quickly as possible and went out into the dining room, and there on the floor were the 3 commercial travelers. Their faces looked simply dreadful, smothered in blood, and I felt quite sick. At the other end of the room were a lot of men, miners and stockmen, who were surrounding Dick Scott, slapping him on the back, and imploring him to drink with them. It seems that as soon as I had gone to my room to change, the valiant Dick had told them that the drummers had insulted Mr. Granger's sister, and in a few minutes the room was cleared and a ring formed, and Dick actually did what the landlord termed smashed up the whole 3 in 5 minutes. "I'm sure I shall like Mr. Dick Scott," said Sheila. "I had to try hard and not laugh when he pointed to you, and said in his big, deep voice, 'There they are, having a cooler.' I thought at first he meant you were cooling yourselves." "Any drink is called a cooler," explained Myra. "But oh dear, how I do chatter! The fact is, I'm so wildly excited, and want to talk so much that I can't talk fast enough. But I must first of all tell you this, I'm really most sincerely glad to meet you, for I feel as if I knew you well. Mrs. Farrow, I spent a week at Minerva Downs, told me you were coming, and that she was longing to see you. I am sure you will be very, very happy with her. She is the most lovable, sweet woman in the world, and when she spoke of your mother her eyes filled with tears. And the children are simply splendid. I suppose I am unduly fond of them because they made so much of me, and think that my brother is the finest rider in the world, and he is that, indeed. Isn't that Irish?" "Yes," said Sheila smilingly. "That is Irish, and I am sure I shall be very happy there." Myra Granger, who was certainly, as she had said, wildly excited, suddenly moved her chair close to that on which Sheila sat. "Miss Caroline, I'm sure that you and I will always be great chums, as they say here in North Queensland, and I'm just dying to tell you of something. Within this last hour I have become engaged to Mr. Mallard. Even Ted doesn't know it yet. Oh, I have heaps and heaps of things to tell you. Can't we have a real, nice long talk tonight?" "Indeed we can," said Sheila, looking into the girl's bright, happy face. Chapter 9 Dinner with the Refined Family. Somewhat to the annoyance of Granger and his friends, they found on their arrival at Magnetic Villa that there were several other visitors there who had apparently come to dine. Whether they were personal friends of Mrs. Trapham or not, or were paying guests, like themselves, they could not at first discover. "Dinner will be ready at 8 o'clock, Miss Granger," said Mrs. Trapham sweetly to Myra, who with Sheila had been shown into their private sitting room, and then she added quickly, as she heard a footstep in the passage, "You have not met my daughter. Come, Juliet dear, Miss Granger, my eldest daughter, Miss Caroline, Miss Trapham." The 2 girls bowed rather coldly to Miss Trapham, who, after the usual commonplaces, asked Miss Granger if she were not tired. Very, and so is Miss Caroline. We shall be glad of an hour's rest before dinner. The hint was unmistakable, and Miss Trapham smiled herself out, inwardly raging at what she told her mother was Sheila's forwardness in so soon thrusting herself upon Miss Granger. As she went out, Sheila looked at Myra and laughed. We are certainly meant to be treated as members of the family, whether we like it or not. I wonder if the other people we saw are as pushful as Mamma and Juliet. I trust not. That would be awful, even for a week. Mallard was in Granger's room, sprawled out on the bed, talking to him and smoking, whilst the latter was opening a leather trunk which contained some bottles of whiskey and soda water, and a small box which held the remains of the ice. We can't let this melt on as the Irish would say, Mallard. And he placed it in the toilet basin in its covering of blanket. Now move your lazy self and break a piece off with your knife, whilst I open this bottle of Kinahan's and some soda. I trust the cultured family will not object to the sound of a cork popping at 7 o'clock. Not they, said Mallard as he rose. They would not mind if you took the whiskey to the table and drank it out of the bottle. Oh, I can gauge the old dame pretty well, I think. Avarice is writ large in her face, and she'll squeeze us all she can. She told me in a mysterious aside that the butler kept all the very best wines and liquor obtainable. I thanked her, and said I usually provided my own. She didn't like it a bit, but I'm not going to pay her a sovereign for a bottle of whiskey or Hennessy when I can get a case of either for a £5 note. Oh, he added disgustedly, they're all alike. Well, don't worry, old man, said his friend philosophically, as he handed him a glass. There, take this. I wonder if Mrs. Trapper, or whatever her name is, thinks we are going to dress for dinner. Neither my sister nor Miss Caroline will, and I'm sure I'm not going to establish a bad precedent. Same here. If other people like to waste time dressing for dinner, let them. This town is altogether too new and thriving a place for busy men like ourselves to worry about evening dress. By the way, Granger, I've some news for you that I trust will give you pleasure. Your sister has promised to marry me next year. Granger grasped his friend's hand. I'm glad, very glad, old man. I was wondering what made her so unusually bright this afternoon, but she has kept it dark. Hasn't had a chance to tell you yet. I only asked her a couple of hours ago. Well, let us go and see her and Miss Caroline before dinner. I can hear them talking in the sitting room. Hello? Who is that little fellow out there crossing the lawn with the younger Miss Trapham? He's in full figure. Mallard looked out of the window and saw a very diminutive man in evening dress. Oh, that's little Assheton, the new manager for the Australian Insurance Company. He's just out from England. He's a fearfully conceited ape, but a smart fellow at the insurance business. Great fun at the Queen's the other day with him. He came in, dressed in frock coat, tall hat, and carrying a thick, curly stick as big as himself. Of course everyone smiled, and he took it badly, couldn't see what there was to laugh at, and when old Charteris, the commissioner, asked him how much he would take for the hat, he put his monocle up and said freezingly, Sir, I do not know you. That made us simply howl, and then, when we had subsided a bit, Morgan the barrister, who is here on circuit with Judge Cooper, said in that fanny, deep, rumbling voice of his, Are you, sir, one of the, circus company which, arrived today? The poor little beggar was furious, lost his temper, and called us a lot of ill-mannered, vulgar fellows, and then someone or other whipped off the offending hat, threw it into the street, and made a cock shy of it. I'll have satisfaction for this outrage, he piped. Landlord, send for a policeman. I'll give all these men in charge. Your house is very disorderly. Do you know who I am? No, nor do I care, said old Cramp, down whose cheeks the tears were running. But if you'll come here like that every day, I'll give you a sovereign, and we'll have the hat. Oh, you're better than any circus I ever saw. Oh, and he went off into another fit. The poor little man looked at us in a dazed sort of a way, thought us lunatics, and then when old Chartens asked him not to mind a bit of miner's horseplay, but to sit down and have some fizz, he called him an audacious ruffian, and shrieked out, I am Mr. B. D. Assheton, the manager of the Australian Insurance Company. Do you possibly imagine I would drink with a person like you? Granger laughed. It must have been great fun. Rather, but the cream of it is to come yet. He rushed out into Flinders Street, found Sergeant Doyle and a policeman, and came back panting and furious, and pointing to Charteris, told them to take him in charge. Doyle looked at us blankly, saw we were nearly dead with laughing, and then took Assheton aside, and said in his beautiful brogue, "Me little man, it's drinking ye've been. Do yez want me to arrest the police magistrate himself? Who are ye at all? Ye'd better be after going home and lying down, or I'll lock ye up for making a disturbance. Do ye mind me now?" Granger could no longer control his laughter, and in the midst of it, Myra tapped vigorously at the door. He rose and opened it. "Whatever is all this noise about, Ted? You two great boys. Oh, take Mallard away, Myra, for heaven's sake." A little before 8 o'clock the deafening clamor of a gong announced dinner, and the company filed in. Mrs. Trapham and the Misses Trapham were in very much evening dress, as Sheila murmured to Myra, and they seemed somewhat surprised that neither Miss Granger nor Miss Caroline had donned anything more unusual than perfectly made dainty gowns of cool white Indian muslin. Granger and Mallard wore the usual white duck suits, the most suitable and favored dress for a climate like that of torrid North Queensland, and Sheila could not but admire their big well-set-up figures. Both were 6 feet men, and contrast their handsome, bronzed and bearded faces with the insignificant appearance of Assheton and another gentleman in evening dress, a delicate but exceedingly gentlemanly young Scotsman. Of course there were more introductions, all of which were duly and unnecessarily carried out by Mrs. Trapham. Others of that lady's guests were the local Episcopalian clergyman and his wife. The former was a placid, dreamy-looking, mild creature, with soft, kindly eyes. He smiled at everybody, was evidently in abject terror of his wife, a hard-featured lady about 10 years his senior, with high cheekbones and an exceedingly corrugated neck and shoulders. She eyed Myra and Sheila with cold dissatisfaction, and after dinner had once begun, devoted herself to the task of extracting information from the latter regarding her future movements. She had already discussed her with Mrs. Trapham, and had informed her hostess that she had suspicions about a girl who affected mystery in the slightest degree, and who could afford to pay 6 guineas a week for simple board and lodging. "Quite so, Mrs. Wooler," Mrs. Trapham had assented. "I must confess it doesn't look quite right. Even Juliet thinks it very strange for her to be so reticent as to who she is and where she is going. Of course I could have refused to receive her, and am now rather sorry I did not. I understood from her that Mr. Granger was an utter stranger to her, and I was quite surprised to see them all come in together, as if they had known each other for years. Not quite correct, I think. Mr. Granger is very rich," said the clergyman's wife meditatively. "Very," said her friend, who knew that Mrs. Wooler meant to do a little begging, for church purposes, as soon as opportunity offered. "It would be a pity for him to be involved with such a forward-looking young person," she said charitably. But for the first quarter of an hour she had no opportunity of satisfying her curiosity, for Sheila was quite hungry enough not to waste too much time in conversation. At last, however, a chance came, when Mr. Assheton said in his mincing voice, "I believe, Miss Caroline, that, like me, you are quite a new arrival in this country." "Oh dear no! I have lived here ever since I was 2 years old." "Here? In Townsville?" "I meant Australia," Sheila observed placidly. "Then you are not an Australian-born Miss Caroline?" put in Mrs. Wooler with a peculiarly irritating condescension of manner and surprised tone, as if she meant to say, "I am sure you are. You certainly are not ladylike enough to be an English girl." "No, I am not," was the reply. "Do you think you will like Queensland, Mr. Assheton?" "I really have as yet formed no definite impression. Possibly I may in the end contrive to like it." "Do. It would be a great pity for the country if you did not," said Sheila gravely, without moving an eyelid. "Do you purpose making a long stay in Queensland, Miss Caroline?" pursued Mrs. Wooler. "A very long one, perhaps, perhaps on the other hand a very short one. Or it may be that I may adopt a middle course, and do either. Granger, who was opposite, heard her, and as she looked across at him, he saw that she was playing her questioner and quite enjoying it. Never for one moment did the clergyman's wife dream that Sheila meant to be anything else but evasive, so she followed up. To her mind it was absolutely incredible that any woman would dare to snub her, Mrs. Wooler, daughter of a dean, and possessing an uncle who had on several occasions been spoken of by the Bishop of Dullington as his probable successor. Such a thing was impossible. I presume, however, that your stay in Townsville itself will be short, Miss Caroline? You will find it a very expensive place, especially if you have no friends to whom you can go. Sheila's face flushed. Her blood was getting up, and Myra looked at her nervously. Is there no girls' friendly society, Young Women's Christian Association, or other kindred institution, where I could be taken in and done for? She asked sweetly. Not as yet, but I am thinking of taking steps to found a girls' friendly society. Such an institution will soon be a necessity in a growing place like this. How nice it would be for me to go there instead of staying at a boarding house. Juliet Trapping's sallow face flushed with rage, and Mrs. Trapping, who saw that something was occurring, spoke loudly to Mr. Wooler, who answered in his usual soft voice. But Mallard, who was seated next to Miss Lilla Trapping, shot Sheila an encouraging glance. Quite so, went on Mrs. Wooler. I disapprove most strongly of any young woman incurring risks that can be avoided. What risks? And Sheila turned and looked steadily at Mrs. Wooler. The sharp query somewhat upset the inquisitive lady, who hardly knew what she meant herself. Oh, the risks of getting into debt, living beyond one's means, and things like that. Oh, I see, madam. And Sheila bowed gravely, although the danger signals were showing now on her cheeks. Then she added very clearly and distinctly. That would be most dreadful to happen to anyone, would it not, Mr. Asherton? Oh, horrible, for a lady. But, she went on, and as she spoke she gazed so intently into Mrs. Wooler's face that every one at the table saw her change color. But I am sure, Mrs. Wooler, that no girl could possibly come to such a sad condition while you are in Townsville, to give her the benefit of your years, your advice, and your experience, even though that advice was thrust upon her in a manner that I believe might possibly cause well-deserved resentment. And then, with a scornful smile still on her lips, she turned to Mr. Asherton and asked him sweetly if he did not think it was beginning to be very warm so early in the year? By heavens! Muttered Mallard to Myra. She has done the parson woman good. Look at her face. It's unpleasant to look at. Mrs. Wooler's features were a study. Unable to speak, and her hands trembling with rage, she gave the girl one glance of hatred, and then tried to eat, and Vivash, who had the sense to do so, at once began telling her some idiotic and pointless story about himself when he sang in a cathedral choir until his voice failed him. Just then a long ring was heard at the front door, and the butler presently came to Mallard, and said, One of the reporters, sir, from the Champion wishes to see you. Most important, sir, he says. Will you please see him at once? Making his excuses, Mallard left the dining room and went into one of the sitting rooms, where the reporter was awaiting him. Chapter 10 The Champion issues a special. 10 minutes later Mallard was at the hall door giving instructions to the reporter. Hurry back as fast as you can, Winthrop, and tell Mr. Flynn to rash the special through. And as fast as any farther news come in, rap out another. Get all the boys you can, and distribute the specials everywhere, anywhere. Chuck some over into the cemetery. They'll make the dead get up and holler. Tell the boys that they are not to make any charge. Get the foreman to head it special. Gratis. Any one newsboy who makes a charge for this special will be immediately dismissed. See? And tell the boys they will get 5 shillings each extra in the morning. I'll be down in another 20 minutes or so. Go on, Winthrop, loop. Mr. Winthrop, who was as excited as Mallard himself, looped, and the editor returned to the dining room with a galley-proof slip in his hand. Every one, of course, saw by his face that something had occurred. I won't sit down again, Mrs. Trapping, If you and the other ladies will excuse me, for I have to hurry back to the office to attend to some important business. There is great news." Then, bending down, he placed his hand on Granger's shoulder and whispered, "You must come with me, old man. There is glorious news from Chinkie's. I'll tell you all about it in a minute, as soon as we are outside. Make your apologies and let us go." And then going over to Mrs. Trapham, he handed her the proof to read to her guests and hurried out with Granger, leaving every one in the room eager to learn what had occurred. "Oh, dear me!" began Mrs. Lee Trapham, adjusting her pince-nez, which always interfered with her sight. "Dear me, how very exciting to be getting gold so easily," said Mrs. Trapham, as she laid the proof on the table. "Your brother will be delighted, Miss Granger." "He will be pleased, of course," absented Myra. "He always had a belief that a rich alluvial gold field would be discovered in the Banshee Creek country. He sent this particular prospecting party away nearly 2 months ago." "What a Hallwood story about the murdered diggers!" said Mr. Asherton to Myra. "Did it occur near where you were living, Miss Granger?" "About 100 miles further westward, towards the Minerva Downs district. These 2 men, Sandy and Daylight, have committed quite a number of murders during the past 2 years. They killed 5 or 6 poor Chinese diggers on the Cloncurry Road last year. They are both well armed, and it is almost impossible to capture them, as they retreat to the ranges whenever pursued. They are a most ferocious and desperate pair," said Mr. Wooler, who then told their story, which was this. Some 2 or 3 years previously, Sandy and Daylight, who belonged to one of the native police camps in the Gulf district, had, while out on patrol, urged one of their comrades to join with them in murdering their white officer and then absconding. The other man refused, and later on in the day, secretly told the officer that he was in great danger of being shot if he rode on ahead of the patrol as usual. As soon as the party returned to camp, the 2 traitors were quietly disarmed, handcuffed, and then chained to a log till the morning. During the night they managed to free themselves, aided, no doubt, by the trooper who was detailed to guard them, killed the man who had refused to join them by cleaving his skull open with a blow from a tomahawk, and then decamped to the ranges with their rifles and ammunition. They found a refuge and safe retreat with the savage Myals, wild blacks, inhabiting the granite ranges, and then began a career of robbery and murder. Small parties of prospectors found it almost impossible to pursue their vocation in the Myal country, for the dreaded ex-troopers and their treacherous and cannibal allies were ever on the watch to cut them off. In the course of a few months, by surprising and killing 2 unfortunate Chinese packers, the desperadoes became possessed of their repeating rifles and a lot of ammunition, and the old single-shot police carbines were discarded for the more effective weapons. Sandy, who was the leader, was a noted shot, and he and his companion now began to haunt the vicinity of isolated mining camps situated in country of the roughest description. Parties of 2 or 3 men who had perhaps located themselves in some almost inaccessible spot would go on working for a few weeks in apparent security, leaving one of their number to guard the camp and horses, and on returning from their toil would find their comrade dead or severely wounded, the camp rifled of everything it contained, and the horses speared. And the hardy and adventurous pioneers would have to retreat to one of the main mining camps, situated perhaps 50 miles away, with nothing left to them but the hard-won gold they had saved and their mining tools, but ready and eager to venture forth again. One day, so the clergyman related, a man named Potter was traveling from Bucktown to Port Denison, and camped beside a small waterhole to rest until the morning. After unsaddling and hobbling out the horse he had been riding, and unloading the pack-horse, he threw his pack-bags at the foot of a Leichhardt tree, lit a fire, and began to boil a billy of tea. He knew that he was in dangerous country, and that it was unwise of him to light a fire, but being of a reckless disposition, and having a firm belief in his luck, he took no further precaution beyond opening the flap of his revolver pouch. He had just taken out a piece of damper and some salt meat, which, with the hot tea, were to be his supper, when he was startled to hear someone address him by name, and looking up, he saw a powerfully built black fellow with a long black beard and smiling face standing a dozen yards or so away. He was all but nude, but round his waist was buckled a broad leather police belt with 2 ammunition pouches, In his right hand he carried a repeating rifle. "Don't you know me, Mr. Potter?" he said in excellent English. Potter recognized him at once, and the two shook hands. "Why, you're Sandy! Have you left the police?" He knew nothing of what had occurred. "Yes," was the reply. "I skipped." And carelessly putting his rifle down, he asked Potter if he had any tobacco to spare. "Yes, I can give you a few plugs." And going to his saddle bags he produced 4 square plugs of tobacco, which he handed to his visitor, who took them eagerly, at once produced a silver-mounted pipe, probably taken from some murder digger, filled it, and began to smoke and talk. "My word, Mr. Potter," he said with easy familiarity, "it is a good thing for you that I knew you." And he showed his white, even teeth in a smile. "But I haven't forgot that when I got speared on the Albert River 5 years ago you drove me into Bricktown in your buggy to get a doctor for me." He had formerly been one of Potter's stockmen, and had been badly wounded in an encounter with wild blacks. Potter made some apparently careless reply. He knew that Sandy, though an excellent stockman, had always had a bad record, and indeed he had been compelled to dismiss him on account of his dangerous temper. He heard later on that the man had joined the black police, and a deserter from the black police is in 9 cases out of 10 an unmitigated villain. Then Sandy became communicative, and frankly told his involuntary host part, but part only, of his story, and wound up by saying, "You must not sleep here tonight. There is a big mob of Miles camped in the riverbed 3 miles away from here. If they see you, they'll kill you for certain between now and tomorrow night, when you are going through some of the gorges. You must saddle up again, and I'll take you along another track and leave you safe." Tired as the horses were, Potter took Sandy's advice, and the two started at sunset, the black Ella leading. They traveled for some hours, and then again camped, this time without a fire. Sandy remained till daylight, and during a further conversation boasted that he had enough gold and nuggets to allow him to have a fine time in Sydney or Melbourne, where he meant to make his way some day, when things got a bit quiet and people thought he was dead. In proof of his assertion about the gold he gave Potter a 2-ounce nugget he picked out from several others which were carried in one of his ammunition pouches. Before they parted Potter gave him, at his particular request, one of the 2 blankets he carried, and then Sandy and he shook hands, and the black fellow, rifle in hand, disappeared, and left his former master to continue his journey. "What a Hallwood Chewactor!" said Mr. Asherton, when the clergyman had concluded his story. "Why don't the police exert themselves and catch or shoot the fellow? It is such very difficult country," explained Myra, "and in fact has not yet all been explored." The ladies rose, and Myra and Sheila, pleading fatigue, went to their rooms, or rather to Myra's, leaving Mrs. and Miss Trapham and Mrs. Wooler to, as Sheila said, "tear me to pieces." But I could not let that woman insult me without retaliating. "Of course you did right. She's an odious creature." Granger returned alone about 11 o'clock. He tapped at Myra's door, and asked her if she was asleep. "No, Miss Caroline is here. We've been having a lovely talk." "Well, go to bed, and have a lovely sleep. I want to see you both, especially Miss Caroline, very early in the morning. We can all go out on the beach before breakfast." "Very well, Ted. Has Mr. Mallard come in?" "No, he will not be here for another half-hour or more. Good night." Mrs. Trapham had heard his voice, and quietly opened the door of her own sitting-room, where she and Juliet, Mrs. Wooler had been discussing Sheila's delinquencies. "Well," gasped the mother to her daughter, as she softly closed the door again. "What on earth is going on, I should like to know? Did you hear that? I want to see you both very early, especially Miss Caroline. What is there going on? I must go and see Mrs. Wooler in the morning and tell her. And on the beach too. Why can't they be more open?" Master Mordaunt, who was in the corner devouring some jelly and pastry given to him by his fond mother, looked up and said, with distended cheeks, "Ain't the beach open enough?" "Hold your tongue, you horrid little animal," said the irate Juliet. Chapter 11: A Change of Plans. Myra and Sheila, both early risers, were dressed and awaiting Granger on the veranda when he came out of his room at 7 o'clock, and they at once descended the steep Melton Hill to the beach. The morning was delightfully fresh and cool, and the smooth waters of Cleveland Bay were rippling gently to a fresh southerly breeze. Eastward, and 7 miles away, the lofty green hills and darker-hued valleys of Magnetic Island stood clearly out in the bright sunlight, and further to the north Great Palm Island loomed purple-gray against the horizon. Overhead was a sky of clear blue, flecked here and there by a few fleecy clouds, and below, on the landward side, a long curve of yellow beach trending from a small rocky and tree-clad point on the south to the full-bosomed and majestic sweep of Cape Halifax to the north. "What a lovely day!" exclaimed Sheila as Granger, as soon as they had descended the hill and stepped on the firm yellow sand, led them to a clump of black, shining rocks. "I wish I were a girl of 12, so that I could paddle about in the water." "There is nothing to stop you doing that at Minerva Downs, Miss Cardan," said Granger with a smile. "There is a lovely fresh-water lagoon there, with a dear sandy bottom, and the Faroe children, big and little, spend a good deal of their time there bathing and fishing." Then, as the girls seated themselves, he at once plunged into the subject uppermost in his mind. "Myra, the news that came through last night has put me in a bit of a quandary, both as regards you and Miss Caroline. Now tell me, would you mind very much if I left you today and returned to Chinkie's flat?" "No, indeed, Ted. Surely I would not be so selfish as to interfere with your business arrangements. That's a good little girl. I did want to stay in Townsville for a week or two after you had left, then I could have taken Miss Caroline as far as Chinkie's flat on her way to Minerva Downs. But I can do something better, as far as she is concerned. You will only be here for a week, and you can suffer the trapping people for that time. Mallard," and he smiled, "will no doubt try to make the time pass pleasantly for you. Don't be so silly, Ted. Get to the point about Miss Caroline. When is she leaving?" "Today, if you will, Miss Caroline, with me. The warden and his troopers are leaving at noon for the New Rush, and Charteris, when I explained things to him, I saw him last night at Mallard's office, said he will be very pleased if we will come with him. Will it be too much of a rush for you?" "Oh no, Mr. Granger. But I have no horse." And then, as she thought of leaving her newly found girl friend so soon, she looked a little miserable, and her hand stole into Myra's. "Oh, that's all right," said Granger cheerfully. "I've 2 for you, Myra's, and 1 Charteris is lending me for you. Can you ride hard and fast? Charteris is a terror of a man for pushing along to a new rush. I won't make him feel cross, I assure you, Mr. Granger." "Then it's decided." Sheila well knew that whether she had or had not decided, he had, yet though dimly resentful, she was quite content when she looked into his quiet gray eyes. "You see, Miss Caroline, it's quite likely I may be able to go all the way with you to Minerva Downs, and therefore we ought not to miss traveling with the Commissioner as far as he goes. Sub-Inspector Lamington, of the Native Police, is also coming with us. He's off on a wild goose, or rather, a wild nigger, chase after Sandy and Daylight and their Mayall friends. If, when we get to Chinkie's flat, I find that I must go with Charteris to the New Rush, your friend Dick Scott and my own trusty black boy Jackie will take you on to Minerva Downs. You can travel with Lamington and his troopers part of the way after you leave Chinkie's. Take some light luggage on a pack horse, the rest, I am sorry to say, will have to come on from here by bullock team. But it is not unlikely that I may be able to take you all the way." "I am very, very grateful to you, Mr. Granger," said Sheila. "I fear I am going to prove a great encumbrance to you." "Oh, Ted is a dear old brother," said Myra, patting his brown, sun-tanned hand affectionately. After a walk along the beach as far as the small, rocky point, they returned to breakfast, and great was Mrs. Trapping's astonishment when Granger informed her that he was leaving in a few hours. "Not for long, I trust," she said graciously, bearing in mind that he had told her he might remain for a week or 2 after Myra had left. "I do not think I shall be in Townsville again for some months," he replied, as he handed her 14 guineas. "This is for the week for my sister and for me." "Thank you," said the lady, with a dignified bow, for she felt a little resentful at his not telling her more. Then she said with a sweet smile, "We will take good care of Miss Granger. Either my daughters or I will be delighted to see her safely on board the steamer." "Thank you, but Mr. Mallard will do that." "Oh, indeed," said the lady, with unmistakable disappointment in her voice, and then Granger, without saying a word about Sheila, went to his room to pack, and talk to Mallard, who had not yet risen. "I wonder if Mr. Mallard is leaving too now that his friend is going," anxiously said Juliet a few minutes later. "If he does I shall insist upon having the full 6 guineas, remarked her mother angrily. "No, on second thoughts I won't ask for it. Whether he leaves or not, I may find him very useful. I quite mean to ask him to every day publish a list of guests at Magnetic Villa. Miss Caroline would like to see yes, Mum, if ye are disengaged," said Mary, entering the room. Sheila was in the drawing-room, and thither Mrs. Trapham sailed. "I shall be leaving Townsville today, I find," she said politely. "Would it be inconvenient for you to have my luggage sent to Horan and Company, who will store it for me until I need it?" Mrs. Trapham's curiosity was intense, but she remembered Mrs. Wooler's experience of the previous evening, and feared. And then she had had the girl's money in advance. "Oh, I am so sorry you are going," she said, with a would-be motherly smile. "Of course I will send it anywhere you wish, but why not leave it here in my care?" And then she could not resist asking one question. "Are you going to Minerva Downs, Miss Caroline, may I ask?" "Yes, I am going there." "What a dreadfully long journey for you! Does it not alarm you? And you are surely not traveling alone?" "Oh, no, I am fortunate in having quite a large escort." "Will you send the luggage down as soon as possible, Mrs. Trapham?" "Certainly," replied the lady, this time with a stiff bow, for she was now inwardly raging at not having learned more. Then she went off to tell Juliet this new development. At 10 o'clock, after Mallard had breakfasted, he and Granger, the latter bidding Mrs. and the Misses Trapham a polite goodbye, went away, and shortly after Dick Scott appeared, leading a pack-horse. He took off the empty bags, and marched up to the front door. "Mr. Granger has sent these to Miss Caroline, miss," he said to Lilla Trapham. "And will you please ask her to put her things into M and I'll wait?" Myra helped Sheila pack some clothing, rugs, and into the bags, and Mary took them out to the burly Dick. "By Jingo! You're the finest woman I've seen here yet," said he affably to the blushing Mary. "Now, will you tell Miss Caroline and Miss Granger that I'll be up with the horses in half an hour? Goodbye, bright eyes." He returned within the time, riding his own horse and leading 2 others. "Side saddles," said Juliet to her mother as they watched through the dining-room windows the big digger dismount and hang the horse's reins over the front gate. As he strode across the lawn, they heard Mary's voice in the hall. It sounded as if she were half crying. "Goodbye, miss, and Heaven's blessin' on ye, and may God send ye a good husband." A moment or two later she entered, wiping her eyes. "The ladies are goin', and wish to spake to yez," she said. Mrs. Trapham and her daughters rose, as Myra and Sheila, clad in their neatly fitting habits, came into the room. "I am going to accompany Miss Caroline and my brother for a few miles, Mrs. Trapham, so I shall not be here for lunch," said Myra. "Oh, indeed," said Mrs. Trapham faintly, and then, with a pleasant smile from Myra, and a coldly polite bow from Sheila, they were gone. Scott swung them up into their saddles, and in another minute they were descending the hill. Mother and daughter looked at each other. "So she's going with Mr. Granger," said Juliet, with an unpleasant twitch of her thin lips. The little cat! I'd like to see her fall off." "Never mind her, she's gone now, and I have had 6 guineas from her," remarked her amiable mamma. "Now, if you are coming into Flinders Street with me, make haste, and don't sit grizzling." Poor Juliet! Poor Mrs. Lee Trapham! When they descended the hill and emerged out into Flinders Street, they found the side path crowded with people, who were all gazing into the great yard of the Queen's Hotel, from which was emerging a cavalcade. First came 4 people, the white-bearded Charteris with Myra, and Granger with Sheila. After them a sergeant and 6 white police, and 10 native police with carbines on thighs, and then Dick Scott and dark-faced Inspector Lamington. Behind followed a troop of spare horses. As they swung through the gates, the crowd cheered as Charteris gave the word, and the whole party went off at a sharp canter down the long, winding street. Chapter 12. Sheila becomes one of a very unrefined circle. The night wind was soughing mournfully through the dark line of she-oaks fringing the banks of a small, swiftly running creek, when Sheila was awakened by someone calling to her from outside the little tent in which she was sleeping. She sat up and looked out. "Did you call me, Mr. Granger?" "Yes." "There is a storm coming down from the ranges." "Sorry to awaken you, but we want to make your tent more secure." Aided by Scott, whose giant figure Sheila could scarcely discern, so dark was the night, Granger soon had the tent prepared to resist the storm. As they worked, there came such an appalling thunderclap that it shook the ground beneath her, and for some minutes she was unable to hear even the droning roar of the rain-laden tornado that came tearing down from the mountains, snapping off the branches of the gum trees, bending low the pliant boles of the moaning she-oaks, and lifting the waters of the creek up in sheets. A hand touched her face in the Cimmerian darkness, and Dick Scott's voice, he was shouting with all the strength of his mighty lungs, seemed to whisper, "Lie down, miss, lie down, and don't be afeard. The tent will stand, as we are pretty well sheltered here, and—" Another fearful thunderclap cut short his words, and she instinctively clutched his hand. She was used to terrific thunderstorms in New South Wales, but she had ne'er heard anything so awful as this. It seemed as if the heavens had burst. "Where is Mr. Granger?" she asked, putting her lips to Dick's ear and speaking loudly. "Here, beside me, miss." "And poor Jackie? Where is he?" "We'll find out presently, miss. Most likely the horses have cleared out, and he's gone after 'em," shouted Scott. For another 5 minutes the howling fury of the wind and the hissing of the rain rendered any further conversation impossible. Then came a sudden lull of both. Granger struck a match and lit a small lantern he was holding, and Sheila felt a great satisfaction as the light showed upon his face, calm and quiet as ever, as he looked at her and smiled. "You must pardon us coming into the tent, Miss Caroline, but we wanted to light and leave the lantern with you. I'm afraid the horses have bolted for shelter into the sandalwood scrub lower down the creek, or into the gullies, and Jackie has gone after them. Will you mind staying here alone for an hour or two while Scott and I help him to find them?" "Not at all," she replied bravely. "And I really do not need the light. I am not at all afraid. I know that, Miss Caroline. But it will serve to show us the way back." This was merely a kindly fiction. "And if, during a lull in the rain, you should hear any of the horses' bells, will you fire 2 shots from that Winchester rifle there beside you? It is possible that they may be quite near to us. Old Euchre, one of the pack horses, has as much sense as a Christian, and it is quite likely that while Scott, Jackie, and I are looking for them in the scrub, he will lead them back here." Then placing the lantern beside her, and partly shielding it with a saddle cloth to protect it more fully from the gusts of wind, he and Scott went out into the blackness. She heard Scott a minute or two later give a loud cooee for Jackie, and fancied she heard an answering cry from the black boy, a long distance away. Then the rain again descended in a torrential downpour, and drowned out all other sounds. 2 weeks had passed since Sheila had left Townsville with Granger, and the hard-riding old warden, and the swarthy-faced Lamington and his savage-eyed, half-civilized troopers. At Chinkie's flat they had learnt that there were now 300 white miners at the new rush on Banshee Creek, but that everything was quiet, and that no disputes of any kind had occurred, and all that Charteris would have to do would be to visit the place, and, according to the Goldfields Act, proclaim Banshee Creek to be a new goldfield. So, after spending a night at Granger's new house, built on the ridge overlooking the ever-victorious battery, with its clamorous stampers pounding away night and day, the warden bid Sheila and Granger goodbye, and rode off with his hardy white police, leaving Lamington and his black, legalized murderers to go their own way in pursuit of Sandy and Daylight, and disperse the miles, if they could find them. Such dispersion meaning the shooting of women and children as well as men. Now, the truth is, that Granger should have gone on with the warden to the new rush, where his prospecting party was anxiously awaiting his arrival. But he was deeply in love with Sheila Carolyn, and she with him, although she did not know it. But she was mightily pleased when the ever-victorious Granger told her that he was going to take her all the way to Minerva Downs, as he wanted to see Pharaoh about buying 100 bullocks to send to the new rush at Banshee Creek. This was perfectly true, but he could very easily have dispatched a letter to Pharaoh, who would have sent the bullocks to the meat-hungry diggers as a matter of business. As she had stood on the veranda of Granger's house in the early morning, watching Charteris and his troopers depart, and listening to the clang and thud of the 25 stampers of the new battery of the ever-victorious, pounding out the rich golden quartz, handsome, swarthy-faced Sub-Inspector Lamington ascended the steps and bade her good morning. "So you and Granger travel with me for another 90 miles or so, Miss Carolyn," he said with undisguised pleasure. "Will you be ready soon?" "In half an hour." "Ah, that's right. My boys and I are anxious to get to work." And he went on to the horse-yard. Sheila could not help a slight shudder as she heard the soft-voiced, debonair Lamington speak of his work. She knew what it meant: a score or two of still, bullet-riddled figures of men, women, and children lying about in the hot desert sand, or in the dark shades of some mountain scrub. Charteris had told her Lamington's story. He was the only survivor of an entire family who had been massacred by the blacks of Fraser's Island, and had grown up with but one object in life: to kill every wild black he came across. For this purpose alone he had joined the native police, and there were dark tales whispered of what he had done. But the authorities considered him a good man, and when he and his fierce troopers rode into town and reported that a mob of wild blacks had been dispersed, no one ventured to ask him any questions, but every one knew what had occurred. So with Lamington and his silent, grim Danny Tez, Sheila, Granger, Scott, and Jackie traveled together for nearly 100 miles, and then the two companies separated, Lamington heading towards that part of the forbidding-looking mountain range where he hoped to find his prey, and Granger and his party keeping on to the west. "It's dangerous country, Granger," the police officer said as he bade them goodbye. "There are any amount of niggers all around, so you will need to be careful about your fire at night. Shift your camp a good half-mile after you have lit your fire and had supper." Granger smiled. "I've been through the mill, Lamington. But I don't think we shall have any trouble unless you head them off and send Sandy and his friends down onto us." "I do mean to head them off, and drive them down from the range into the Spinifex country about 30 miles from here, when I can round them up," said Lamington softly, as if he were speaking of driving game. "Sorry you won't be with me to see the fun. The £500 reward for the production of Messrs. Sandy and Daylight, alive or dead, I already consider as mine. It will give up a trip to Melbourne to see the Cup next year. But you can't claim the money, you're an official. This is an exceptional case, and no distinction is to be made between civilians and policemen. The government does sensible things sometimes." 2 hours passed, and Sheila, anxiously awaiting the sound of the horses' bells, or the reappearance of Granger and Scott, began to feel that something had gone amiss. The storm had ceased, and when she rose and stepped outside she saw that a few stars were shining. Seating herself upon a granite boulder, she listened intently, but the only sound that broke the black silence of the night was the rushing of the waters of the creek. She placed her hands to her mouth, and was about to give a loud coo, when her pride stopped her. "If they hear me," she thought, "they will think I am frightened." She went back into the tent and again lay down, and tried by the light of the lantern to read a book which Myra Granger had given her. Her watch had stopped, and when she put the book aside she knew that the dawn was near, for the harsh cackle of a wild pheasant sounded from the branches of a Leichhardt tree near by, and was answered by the shrill, screaming notes of a flock of king parrots which the storm had driven to settle amidst the thick, dense scrub on the bank of the creek. Quite suddenly she became aware that something was moving about in the grass outside the tent, and a thrill of alarm made her instinctively clutch the Winchester rifle beside her. Surely there was someone there, whispering. Very quietly she sat up and waited. Yes, there certainly were people outside, and a cold chill of terror possessed her when the whisperings changed to a rapid and louder muttering in an unknown tongue, and she knew that her visitors were blacks. Unable to even speak, she heard the soft rustle of footsteps drawing nearer and nearer, and then the closed flap of the tent was pulled slowly aside by a long black hand, and the wicked eyes of the bearded face of a huge aboriginal, naked to the waist, gazed into hers. For a second or two he looked at her, watching her terrified expression as a snake watches the fascinated bird. Then he drew back his lips and showed 2 rows of gleaming teeth in a fierce smile of exultation. By a mighty effort she tried to raise the Winchester, and in another moment the black fellow sprang at her, covered her head with a filthy kangaroo's skin and silently bore her outside. For quite 10 minutes she felt herself being carried swiftly along, till her captor came to the creek, which he crossed. Then he uncovered her face and spoke to her in English. "If you make a noise I will kill you, and throw your body in the creek. I am Sandy the trooper." She gazed at him mechanically, too horrified at her surroundings to utter a sound. For dawn had just broken and she saw that she was standing in a small open space in the midst of a sandalwood scrub, and encircled by 20 or 30 ferocious-looking Myall blacks all armed with spears and waddies. The strong ant-like odor which emanated from their jet-black skins filled her nostrils and, putting her hands to her eyes, she shuddered and fell upon her knees with a choking sob. "Come, none of that, missy," said another voice in English, and her hands were rudely pulled aside. "You must get up and walk, perhaps we won't hurt you. But if you make a noise I'll give you a tap on the head with this waddy." And the speaker flourished a short club over her head. "Come! Get up!" She obeyed him, rose slowly to her feet, and in another instant darted aside, and breaking through the circle of Myalls, plunged into the scrub towards the creek. But before she had gone 20 yards one of them had seized her by her loosened hair, and a long pent-up scream burst from her lips. Again the filthy skin was thrown over her head, then her hands were quickly tied behind her with a strip of bark. Sandy lifted her up in his arms, and he, Daylight, and their followers plunged into the forest and set off towards the mountains. Chapter 13 On the Scent. Through the blackness of the night and the pouring rain Granger and Scott made their way down the right bank of the creek to where, a mile or a mile and a half away, was a thick scrub of sandalwood trees, in which they imagined the terrified horses had taken refuge. The rushing, foaming waters guided them on their way, though every now and then they had to make a detour round the heads of some gullies, which were bank-high with backwater from the swollen creek. As soon as there was a lull in the storm they again cooeed, but received no answer from Jackie. Granger, who had the most implicit faith in the judgment of his black boy, now began to fear that the horses, instead of making for the scrub, had gone towards the mountains, where it would perhaps be most difficult to get them. However, there was nothing to be done but to first examine the scrub, and then to see what had become of Jackie. Both he and Scott had brought their bridles with them, and the black boy, they knew, had his as well, and they were hoping that at any moment they might meet him driving the horses back to the camp. By the time the scrub was reached the storm had begun to break somewhat, for although rain still fell heavily, the wind was losing its violence, and presently, to their satisfaction, they heard Jackie's voice shouting somewhere near them. "Where are you?" called out Scott. "Here, on cattle camp, in middle of scrub. I been catch old Euchre and 2 more horse, but can't find other pack horse and bay filly and roan colt. I 'fraid they'd been go way back up mountain." They found him engaged in tying up the foreleg of Scott's horse with strips of his shirt. The animal, when racing along in the dark, had fallen and out itself badly from knee to hoof. Granger examined the injury, and saw that, although the poor creature was very lame, it could easily be led to the camp. But the loss of the remaining horses was a serious matter, and after a brief discussion it was resolved to first make a thorough search along the creek for another mile before giving up any hopes of finding them in the vicinity of the scrub. Then, if no traces could be found, they were to return to the camp for their saddles, and Jackie and Granger would endeavor to pick up their tracks as soon as daylight broke. An hour was spent fruitlessly, and they turned back and made for the camp, Scott and Granger riding barebacked, and Jackie going ahead on foot, leading the lame horse. Presently they came to a deep, rocky gully, which they crossed, and were carefully ascending the steep bank when Scott's horse tripped over a loose stone and fell heavily, with his rider underneath. Jackie and Granger at once went to his assistance and got the horse away, but Scott lay perfectly motionless, and when spoken to did not answer. Granger, like all good bushmen, had kept his matches dry, and striking a light, he saw that the big digger had not only received some injury to his head, but worse still had broken his leg. The bone had snapped completely across halfway down from the knee. For quite 10 minutes the poor fellow remained unconscious. Then, when he came to his senses, his first question was about the horse. Was he hurt? No, Dick, but your leg is broken. The language that flowed from Mr. Scott's bearded lips cannot possibly be set down, but he resigned himself cheerfully to Granger and Jackie when they put the broken limb into rough splints made of bark and twigs to keep it in position until they could do something better on their arrival at the camp. Refusing to be carried, Scott dragged himself up the bank, and then allowed them to lift him on Euchre's back, Granger riding and Jackie walking beside him. By the time they reached the camp it was broad daylight, and an alarmed look came into Granger's eyes when there was no response to his loud cooee. Thrice repeated. Suddenly Jackie, whose dark eyes were rolling unnaturally as he glanced all around him, let go the horse he was leading, sprang forward, and entered the tent. He reappeared in a moment. "What is wrong, Jackie? Where is she?" "Gone," was the quick reply. "My old black fellow been here and take her away." "Good God!" said Granger hoarsely, feeling for the moment utterly unnerved as he watched the black boy walk quickly round and round the tent, examining the grass. "Plenty black fellow been here," he said, "but only one fellow been go inside tent. I think he catch him up missy when she sleep." An oath broke from Scott's lips. "Let me down, boss, let me down! It's all my fault. Quick! Put me inside the tent and let me be. You and Jackie has 2 good horses, and Jackie is the best tracker this side o' the country." "I'll see to your leg first, Dick," cried Granger, as he and Jackie lifted him off Euchre and helped him into the tent. "By jingo, you won't, boss," was the energetic reply. "What does it matter about my leg? Let me be. I'll pull along all right, even if you are away for a day, or 2 days, or a week. For God's sake, boss, don't fool about me. Think of her. Saddle up, and bring her back. They can't be far away. Jackie, I'll give you £50 if you get her. Boss, take plenty o' cartridges and some tucker. I'll be as right as rain here. But hurry, boss. If they get her into the mountains we'll never see any more of her but her gnawed bones." And the big man struck his clenched fist passionately upon the ground. But Granger, although almost maddened with fear as to Sheila's fate, would not leave the man helpless, and whilst Jackie was saddling the horses, he put provisions and water, and matches and tobacco, near the poor, excited digger. Then, with the black's aid, he quickly and effectively set the broken leg with proper splints, seized round with broad strips of ti-tree bark. "There, Dick, that's all I can do for you now. You're losing time over me, boss. Hurry! And get the young lady back for God's sake." 5 minutes later Jackie had picked up the tracks of Sandy and Daylight and their allies, and he and Granger, with hearts beating high with hope, were following them up swiftly and surely. Chapter 14 Miss Caroline is all right v. Dick Scott. The tracks of the abductors of Sheila were easily discernible to the practiced eyes of Jackie, than whom a better tracker was not to be found in North Queensland. They led in an almost direct line towards the grim mountain range for about 17 miles, and then were lost at a rapidly flowing, rocky-bottomed stream, a tributary of that on which Granger's camp had been made. Never for one instant did Granger think of questioning the judgment of his tried and trusted black boy, when, as they came to the stream, he jumped off his horse and motioned to his master to do the same. "Them fellow mile have gone into water, boss, and walk along up," he said placidly, as he took out his pipe, filled and lit it. Then he added that they had better take the saddles off the horses, short hobble them, and let them feed. "You don't think, Jackie, that he meant the blacks, might get on too far ahead of us?" he asked, as he dismounted. "No, boss, they are camped now, 'bout a mile or 2 mile farther up creek. We can't take horses there, country too rough, And my old blackfellow can smell horse long way off. All same horse or bullock can smell my old blackfellow long way off. Granger knew that this was perfectly true. Cattle and horses can always scent wild blacks at a great distance, and at once show their alarm. And that the country was too rough for Jackie and him to go any further with the horses was quite evident. However, he knew that as soon as his companion had taken a few pulls at his pipe he would learn from him what his plans were. The weapon that the black boy usually carried was a Snyder carbine, but he had left that at the camp, and taken the spare Winchester, the one Sheila had dropped in the tent, and he was now carefully throwing back the lever, and ejecting the cartridges, and seeing that it was in good order ere he reloaded it. "Your rifle all right, boss?" he asked. "All right, Jackie, and my revolver too." Jackie grunted, somewhat contemptuously, at the mention of the revolver. "You won't get chance with revolver, boss. Rifle best for you and me this time, I think it. Revolver right enough when you ride after mile in flat country." "Very well, Jackie," said Granger. "I'll leave the revolver behind. What are we going to do?" "First, short hobble horses, and let 'em feed, plenty grass 'bout here. Then you follow me. I think it that them fellow mile camp. Rest. 'Bout 2 mile up creek." "How many are there, Jackie?" "'Bout 20, boss, perhaps 30. And I think it that some feller runaway policeman with them, Sandy or Daylight, I believe." "What makes you think that?" said Granger, instantly remembering that Lamington had said that he meant to try and head off Sandy and his miles down into the Spinifex country. "Come here, boss." Granger followed him to the margin of the creek, which although at dawn had been running half bank high, owing to the tremendous downpour of rain, was now at its normal level. "Look at that, boss." He pointed to a triangular indentation, which, with footmarks, was imprinted in the soft yellow sand at the foot of a small boulder, and taking the butt of his Winchester rifle, fitted it into the impression. "Some feller with Winchester rifle been sit down here, boss, and light his pipe. See, he been scrape out pipe." And he indicated some partially consumed shreds of tobacco, and some ashes which were lying on the sand. "Ah, I see, Jackie." And a cold chill of horror went through him as he thought of Sheila being in the power of such a fiend as Sandy. The Miles would in all likelihood want to kill and eat her, but Sandy or Daylight would probably wish to keep her a captive. And that Jackie was correct in his surmise there could be but little doubt. Both the outlawed ex-policemen had Winchesters, taken from the Chinese packers whom they had murdered. "Go on, Jackie, my boy, for God's sake," he said hoarsely, placing his hand on the Blackbull's shoulder. "Missy may be killed if we do not hurry." "No fear, boss," replied Jackie with cheerful confidence, as he proceeded to strip. "You 'member what I told you 'bout that white woman my all blacks take away with them long time ago, when ship was break up near Cape Melville, and they find her lying on beach? They didn't kill her, these my all nigger like white Mary * too much. I don't think these fellow will kill Missy. I think it Daylight or Sandy will want her for lubra. * take off boots, boss." Granger pulled off his knee boots, and threw them up on the bank, and then he and Jackie short hobbled the horses, and let them feed. The black boy had stripped himself of every article of clothing, except the remnants of his shirt, which he had tied round his loins. Over it was strapped his leather belt with its cartridge pouch. "Come on, boss." And then instead of crossing the creek as Granger had imagined he would, he led the way along the same side, explaining that the Miles, expecting, but not fearing, pursuit, would do all that they could to make the pursuers believe that they had walked up through the creek for a certain distance, and then crossed over to the opposite side. The gins, ****, and pickaninnies, he said, were not with the party that had seized Sheila, either were there any dogs with them. "And you will see, boss," he said as, after they had come 1.5 miles, he pointed to a sandbank on the side of the creek, deeply imprinted with footmarks. "We will find them eating fish in their camp. Look there." Granger saw that on the sandbank were a number of dead fish which had been swept down the creek from pools higher up. That many more had been left stranded, and then taken away, was very evident by the disturbed state of the sand and the numerous footmarks. Suddenly a harsh sound of many voices fell upon their ears, and Jackie came to a dead stop. Motioning to Granger to lie down and await his return, he slipped quietly away, his lithe, black body gliding like a snake through the dense jungle which clothed the banks of the creek. A quarter of an hour later he came back, his black eyes rolling with subdued excitement. "Come on, boss, it is all right. They are camped in an old burra, ground, and Sandy and Daylight are going to fight for Missy. I saw Missy." "Where was she?" said Granger, whose heart was thumping fiercely as, rifle in hand, he sprang to his feet. "In the middle of the burra ground. She sit up, but all the same as if she sleep, eyes shut. Oh God, to think that I left her, to look after horses," Granger said bitterly to himself as he followed Jackie, who little knew how dear Sheila was to the heart of his boss. Swiftly but cautiously Jackie led the way through the scrub until they came to the margin of the burra ground, and then Granger saw 20 or 30 blacks seated on the ground in a circle, spears and waddies in hand. In the center was Sheila, crouched on her knees, with her hands covering her eyes. On each side of her was a Winchester rifle, and a belt with an ammunition pouch, her dowry. And standing near by her, attended by their nude seconds, were Daylight and Sandy, who were also armed with spears and waddies. They were both stripped and painted, and ready to slaughter each other. "Boss," whispered Jackie, "which fellow you want to take?" "I'll take the big man with the beard," said Granger, as he drew up his Winchester. "All right, boss. I take the other man, that's Daylight. But don't shoot until they walk across burra ground, and turn and face each other. Shoot him through Bingy *, boss. Don't try for head, you might miss him." "All right, Jackie." And Granger lay flat on the ground and brought his rifle to his shoulder. "But don't miss your man." "No fear of that, boss. I'm going to give it to Daylight between the eyes. But let me drop him first." "Right." Daylight and Sandy were taken by their seconds to opposite sides of the ring, and then, drawing their heads back and poising their spears, they awaited each other's attack. Then Jackie's Winchester cracked, and Daylight span round and fell dead, and Sandy's spear flew high in air as a bullet took him fair in the chest. And then the savage instinct to slay came upon and overwhelmed Granger, as well as his black boy, and shot after shot rang out and laid low half a dozen of the sitting and expectant savages ere they could recover from their surprise and flee. Granger rushed forward to Sheila and lifted her up. A hysterical sob burst from her as she put her trembling hands out towards him. "Oh, I knew you would come! I knew you would come!" And then her eyes closed, and she lay quiet in his arms. That night, as Sheila, with tear-swollen eyes of gratitude to God for her preservation, lay sleeping in the little tent, Granger and the ever-faithful Jackie sat smoking their pipes beside the recumbent figure of burly Dick Scott, who, broken-legged as he was, had insisted upon being taken outside and camping with them. "Boss," he said, as he handed his pipe to Jackie to be filled, "this will be suthin' for Mr. Mallard to put in the champion, eh?" "Yes, Dick, old son." And Granger put his hand on the big man's shoulder, with a kindly light shining in his quiet, gray eyes. "I'll write and tell him all about it. And I'll tell him what a real, downright, out-and-out white man you are. Get out, boss." And the rough, bearded digger laughed childishly with pleasure. "If I sees anythin' in the champion about me, blow me, but I'm goin' back to Townsville, and I mean to spark that gal at Magnet Villa, she that was cryin' when Miss Caroline came away." "Right you are, Dick. You have promised Jackie £50 if he brought Miss Caroline back, and you will give it to him. But you are one of the ever-victorious crowd, and don't want money, so I won't say any more except that I'll give Mrs. Dick Scott 500 sovereigns for a wedding present." "What is her present surname, Dick?" "Don't know, boss. Didn't ask her. But if she isn't snapped up by one of them flash banker fellows, or some other paper-collared swell, I think I'll get her. Mr. Mallard and Miss Myra said they would put in a good word for me, seein' as I hadn't no time to do any courtin' myself. Dick, old son, she's yours. If you have got my sister and Mr. Mallard to speak for you, it's all right, that's a dead certainty. How is your leg?" "Bully, boss, just bully." "Say, boss." "Yes, Dick. D'ye think we'll get them missin' horses?" Horses be hanged! Do you think I'm troubling about them just now? Why, certainly you ought to be troubling about 'em. Isn't the roan colt and the bay filly worth troubling about? The best blood in the whole bloomin' country is in that bay filly o' Miss Caroline's. And Jimmy Alsan offered you £90 for the roan, didn't he? Granger put out his hand, and grasping Scott's long beard, pretended to shake it. Just you go to sleep, Dick Scott, and don't waggle your chin and talk about horses or anything else. You are a blessed nuisance, and if you wake Miss Caroline up I'll pound you when you get better. Scott grinned, and then he put out his hand. Boss, have you fixed it up with her? I thought as how that there was nothing in the world so sweet in the way of them men as Miss Myra, but Miss Caroline runs her a close second. I have not asked her yet, Dick. You ask her tomorrow, boss. You take my tip, or before you knows where you are some other fellow will be jumping your claim and getting her. I'll think of it, Dick. Don't think too long over it, boss. If it was me, I'd see it through the first thing tomorrow moment. You mind your own business, Mr. Richard Scott, said Granger, with a laugh. All right, boss, but what about them horses? That bay filly. Go to sleep, you silly old ass. At dawn Lamington and his Danites came splashing through the creek, and Granger was aroused by a loud "Hello!" as the swarthy-faced inspector cantered up to the tent and dismounted. Well, here you are, Granger. I know all that has happened. I rounded up the miles outside the Boer ground, only half an hour after you had left, and one of the bucks, whom I dropped with a bullet through his thigh, told me what had occurred, when Sandy and Daylight were just about to fight. How is Miss Caroline? Well, she is sleeping. Take a peg, and he handed Lamington his brandy flask. The officer poured out a stiff nip, drank it off, and then pointed to one of his troopers, who had just dismounted, and was holding in his hand a heavy bundle, wrapped up in an ensanguined saddlecloth. That's my £500, Granger. I'll have to send those heads to Townsville for identification before I can claim the reward. Awfully smart of you to pot both of them. Lamington, you're a beast. Tell that nigger of yours to take that infernal bundle away and keep it out of sight, or, by heavens, you and I will quarrel. Lamington, gentleman at heart, apologized. I am a beast, Granger. I didn't think of Miss Caroline. When Sheila awakened she had to bid Dick Scott goodbye, for Lamington was taking him back to Chinkie's flat. Goodbye, Miss Caroline. You and the boss will pull along all right to Minerva Downs. And when I sees you again I hope that— Dry up, Dick, said Granger, with assumed severity. Oh, I know it's all right, boss, isn't it, Miss Caroline? Yes, Mr. Scott, said Sheila with a smile, as she put her little hand into his. I don't think I shall stay very long at Minerva Downs, and I do think you will soon see me again. At Chinkie's flat? Yes, at Chinkie's flat, said Granger, as he put his arm round Sheila, and drew her to him. Mr. Lamington is sending up a parson from the Bay to Minerva Downs. Boss, cried Scott exultantly, there's going to be a red, rosy, high old time by and by at Chinkie's flat. The end.